Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Agoura Hills City Council meeting. This meeting is being conducted in person in the council chambers and also by utilizing video conferencing. All attendees in the council chambers will be required to follow current state and county public health guidelines. Please silence all cell phones and all electronic devices and do not access Zoom during the live meeting, as it will cause interference with our audiovisual system in the council chambers. Tonight's meeting may be viewed on Zoom via the link on the agenda, by live stream on YouTube, by entering Agoura Hills City Council meeting in your browser and clicking on the link for January 25th, 2023, or view the live or archive meeting on the city's website at agourahillscity.org and click on the Watch Meetings Online button. I will now defer to the city clerk.
Thank you, Mayor Anstead. There will be an opportunity for the public to speak on any item listed on the agenda. Any person in the council chambers who wishes to speak or submit a written comment is requested to complete a public comment card for each item and submit to the city clerk prior to the public comment portion of the item. Comments submitted at the meeting will be provided to the city council for review and filed with the official record. For any person participating remotely, written public comments were requested to be emailed by 4 p.m. today and distributed to the city council in advance of the meeting. To request to speak during public comment, please click on the raise hand button on the Zoom toolbar. Request to speak must be received prior to the mayor closing the public comment portion of the item. Public testimony for all speakers is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. Written public comments will not be read aloud by the city clerk. For full details, please refer to the public participation section on the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you. I now call this meeting to order. Councilmember Wolf, could you do the Pledge of Allegiance for us tonight?
I would be honored to. If everyone could please rise. Place your right hand over your heart and repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated.
We'll now do a roll call. I'll defer to the city clerk for the roll call.
Good evening. Councilmember Lopez?
Here.
Councilmember Sylvester?
Here.
Councilmember Wolf?
Present.
Mayor Pro Tem Buckley Weber?
Here.
Mayor Anstead?
Here.
Mayor Anstead, you have a quorum.
Thank you. Report of closed session. I'll defer to the city attorney.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. Direction was given to staff and no reportable action was taken this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. For a request from the Malibu Lost Hills Sheriff Station to provide an update will be added to the agenda under intergovernmental reports. Will the maker of this motion and second to approve the agenda as amended to add the Malibu Lost Hills Sheriff Station update, please state your name.
Councilmember Sylvester, so moves.
Thank you.
Councilmember Buckley Weber seconds the motion.
Thank you. And I'll defer to the city clerk for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Lopez?
Aye.
Councilmember Sylvester?
Aye.
Councilmember Wolf?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Buckley Weber?
Aye.
Mayor Anstead?
Aye.
Mayor Anstead, you have approval 5-0.
Thank you very much. We now have a presentation. I'll step over. All right, the presentation tonight is for the Los Angeles Football Club. Tonight, on behalf of the City Council, I have the pleasure of presenting a proclamation honoring the Los Angeles Football Club on their 2022 MLS Cup Championship. At this time, I would like to call up LAFC Co-President and Chief Business Officer Larry Friedman to join me. Being here tonight. I have something that I want to read to you and let everybody know about who the Los Angeles Football Club is. So the Los Angeles Football Club was founded on October 30th, 2014 and competes in the Major League Soccer Western Conference with support from actor Will Ferrell and the professional athletes Magic Johnson, Mia Hamm, and Nomar Garcia Pera. It's been 7 years, 5 months, and 18 days, plus 3 penalty kicks, for LAFC to become the 2022 MLS champions. The MLS Cup is the postseason championship match of Major League Soccer, a professional soccer league in the United States and Canada. It was 20 years since 2 number 1 seeds competed against each other for the MLS Cup. LAFC versus Philadelphia Union, the best of the best. MLS Cup 2022, the 27th edition of the MLS Cup, was hosted by LAFC on November 5th, 2022, at their home stadium, Bank of California Stadium in Los Angeles, California, and kicked off with 22,000 spectators in attendance. The game was like something out of a movie, neck and neck with the crowd roaring and fierce gameplay. And just when LAFC saw a glimmer of hope, goalie Max Crepeau suffered an injury, taking him out of the championship. Following a 128-minute match, LAFC beat the Philadelphia Union on penalty kicks after a 3-3 draw, emerged as first-time champions, and tied the record for the highest scoring final in MLS Cup history. LAFC cares for its fans and community and has partnered with various charities and businesses to host events and volunteer opportunities that bring the holiday spirit to thousands of families and community organizations throughout the greater LA area. This past holiday season, LAFC, as a force of good, celebrated its annual season of giving by distributing 500 Thanksgiving meals to families and hosting a virtual holiday toy drive for the children of the Union Rescue Mission's Hope Garden Family Center and Athletes in the Making that concluded with a volunteer gift wrapping event followed by the black and gold holiday party at the Bank of California Stadium where the children received their gifts. Thank you for doing that. What LAFC has shown the city of Agoura Hills is the power of diversity, synergy, and partnership, characteristics that we continue to embody internally and externally. On behalf of the Agoura Hills City Council, it is with great pleasure that I present you with this proclamation to you recognizing the LAFC on their 2022 MLS Cup Championship, a remarkable achievement, and congratulations and best wishes.
There we go.
So now we're going to move to intergovernmental.
Excuse me,
Oh, shoot,
could I
go ahead.
just say
Sure.
something before we
Yes,
close?
yes.
I would just like to congratulate LAFC because we're original season ticket holders, and my husband and my son and my daughter were there when it was being built, the stadium was being built. So we're huge fans, and keep it up. Thank you.
Thank you all for your support. We really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you again. All right, now we'll move to intergovernmental special purpose committee and departmental reports. We'll start with the Greater Conejo Valley Chamber of Commerce update, and I'll defer to Adam Haverstock for the update.
Thank you, Mayor Anstead and council members. My name is Adam Haverstock, and I'm the Director of Government Affairs and Tourism for the Greater Conejo Valley Chamber of Commerce. Here with a few updates from your chamber. The first thing I wanted to talk about is the Chamber's new breakfast event series. The Chamber of Commerce is launching a new breakfast event series for 2023. We are replacing 4 of our traditional structured networking breakfasts with new programming. These events will feature panel discussions and speakers discussing various civic and community issues. The first of these breakfasts was earlier this month. It was our State of the Chamber and annual meeting, and our Chamber President, CEO Danielle Borgia, discussed the work of the Chamber over the last year and what is on the horizon for 2023. Our second event is coming up. It is going to be a civic leaders breakfast, and it will feature a panel discussion of elected leaders in local government. Mayor Chris Anstead of Agoura Hills, Mayor Ray Pearl in Westlake Village, and Mayor Kevin McNamee in Thousand Oaks will all be panelists. Additionally, we will have our two newly elected county supervisors attending. Supervisor Lindsay Horvath in Los Angeles County and Supervisor Jeff Gorell in Ventura County will be participating on the panel discussion as well. This Civic Leaders Breakfast will be on Friday, February 3rd, which is a week from this Friday, and it's going to be at the Courtyard by Marriott in Agoura Hills. More information and registration is on the Chamber website at conejochamber.org. In fact, there's a button right on the front of our homepage that takes you right to the page to get information and register. And then beyond this event, we are planning 2 future panel breakfasts, one on education and one on healthcare. Next, I wanted to tell you about a small business development workshop series we are putting together, and we call it Elevate Conejo Valley. This program is a comprehensive training for entrepreneurs to learn how to start and grow an effective business. It will take place as a series of 7 educational workshops led by industry experts discussing topics like marketing, human resources, technology, finance and accounting, operations, legal, and the importance of relationships. We are partnering with EDC, the Economic Development Collaborative, to bring this program, and each participant will also get one-on-one coaching consulting services for free through EDC. This program will be starting in March with a capacity of up to 30 entrepreneurs, and registration information will be up shortly at conejochamber.org. And then I wanted to give you a couple updates on the Conejo Valley Tourism Improvement District. We finished 2022 well ahead of our budgeted revenue, which is good because our revenue rates tend to mirror the transient occupancy tax receipts for the city. So the city should expect good revenue also in the area of TOT. Specifically, we budgeted for a revenue of $1.15 million for last year, and we ended up finishing the year with $1.54 million. That is a 33% amount of revenue above what we budgeted for. We are planning for another $1.5 million in revenue in 2023. We always, if we can, budget a flat year, and so that's how we're doing our budget. What are we going to do with that funding? Number one, we're going to do conference travel. Conferences are coming back in a big way this year, and the TID board allocated double its previous year's budget toward conference travel in particular. Conventions and trade shows are great avenues to develop corporate and conference travel business. That's an area, when you look at our mix of travel in Conejo Valley, that has been lacking, hasn't really come back quite yet. And so in order to try and grow that corporate and conference business, we're going to go out and try and meet some of those decision makers. Number two, we are purchasing TV ads. We made a really great commercial last year. We showed it at State of the City. I think we showed it at one of these council meetings. So we put it on the air again. We purchased $60,000 in TV ads in the first quarter of 2023. That's about 750 30-second commercials. And as the first quarter and the fourth quarter of the year are the shoulder seasons for our hotels. And so that's the biggest opportunity for growth. So we wanted to hit the ground running and generate demand earlier than normal. And so we're doing that hopefully through TV. And then number three, we are doing video ads. We're making a major change this year from static graphic ads to videos. As you know, platforms like Instagram and TikTok are all the rage, and they are all video first. So we made the decision to spend the majority of our creative budget and our ad placement budget on video content as opposed to photo content. So that's a big change we're making this year. And then finally, I wanted to mention that we are the official hotel partner of the Great Race of Agoura Hills coming up on Saturday, April 1st. We are hoping to convert runners and attendees to that event into overnight stays and have them eat and shop at local businesses. And with that, that does conclude my report this evening. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Adam, I appreciate the update. I wanted to ask you the TV commercials for when should we, are they already being advertised now, or when should we look for those on TV?
We did a 10-week ad buy starting at the beginning of the year through mid-March. So they're not on TV in this local market. They're mostly in the Inland Empire.
Okay.
So the idea is to market out there and hopefully get travelers to make decisions to come into our area.
Awesome. Thank you, Adam. And there,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Hi, Adam. I have a quick question for you. When you're out trying to bring in conference business, is that conference for sites like Kowloon, or are you also, is it downtown LA, or who are you going after?
Normally we're looking for events that can fit in one of our hotels that have event space. Think like the Sheraton Agoura Hills, the new Marriott property, or the Hyatt in Thousand Oaks.
Okay.
That's normally where we're trying to put those events.
Great.
But sometimes it'll be a sporting event at Sports Academy in Newbury Park. Sometimes it'll be an event at Calamigos Ranch. A lot of big fancy corporate people like to go up there too. So, and we'll see benefit from those types of bookings as well.
Great. Thank you so much. Good luck.
any other comments? Okay. Adam, thank you very much for the update.
Thank you.
All right. Next update will be from the Malibu Lost Hills Sheriff's Station update. I'll defer to Lieutenant Roman Voss. You got it. Good to see you.
By the way, here to report the Part 1 crimes for the month of December, as well as some additional information. So for December, we had 0 homicides, 1 rape, which involved a known suspect, 0 robberies, 5 residential burglaries, 3 commercial burglaries, 3 vehicle burglaries, as well as 9 theft-related incidents. Overall, your Part 1 crimes are down 15% for the city, which is a good sign. It was advised that it might be a good idea for me to present some burglary prevention tips for the community. You guys have had a few incidents of residential burglaries, so just to educate some of your residents, I have 10 tips. One is to ensure upstairs and downstairs doors and windows are locked. Leave lights, TV, stereos on when you leave the house. Keep garage doors closed and locked. Ensure outdoor gates are locked, perimeter gates. Remove any backyard furniture, ladders, objects that may be stacked to enter the second floor of your residence. Utilize an audible and monitored home security or surveillance system. Invest in a large dog. It's one of my detective sergeant's most important pieces of advice. Develop a neighborhood watch and neighborhood watch program and/or contact network within your street or neighborhood. Report any suspicious or criminal behavior to the Lost Hills Sheriff's Station. And some of the residents may not be aware of the fact that they can actually request a vacation patrol check to their residents when they're out of town. It's free service. Just call the Lost Hills Station dispatch. It's all confidential, so our deputies will be briefed on that, and they conduct their directed patrols when you're out of town. And they'll ask you some additional questions when you call and request that. In terms of the concern for the residential burglaries and some of the commercial burglaries, I'll advise you some of the mitigation efforts that we are putting forth. In the month of December, our Major Crimes Bureau conducted surveillance operations in Calabasas and Agoura, where the majority of the residential burglaries are occurring. Our Major Crimes Unit is an undercover unit. Typically when they come out here, it consists of maybe 7 to 8 undercover vehicles. They're in plain clothes. They're part of our department, and this is their special trade that they are experts in. So we have had them out here. We've also utilized our reserve deputy cadre at the station, which is we have a large amount of reserve deputies at our station that basically volunteer to serve the community. They conducted approximately 4 operations in the open spaces within Hidden Hills, Agoura, as well as Malibu in the month of December. 3 of those operations were actually 2 were before Christmas and 1 was after Christmas. Part of a partial success story, one of our detectives served a search warrant behind a commercial burglary. I believe it was one probably near Canaan or Agoura Road, in which several suspects were arrested in the city of Industry and stolen property was recovered. We've had several commercial burglaries or thefts recently where individuals go and open a business that's open and they run out with lottery tickets, liquor, etc. We have an outstanding detective that specializes in the commercial burglary aspect, and she's made several arrests probably over the last 2 weeks. I would probably say at least a half a dozen suspects have been arrested or identified in those incidents. I believe there was a burglary at the Wood Ranch restaurant, as well as a sushi restaurant around the corner from there. That vehicle was recovered with burglary tools, as well as stolen property was recovered. We do have video of those individuals actually purchasing burglary tools in the cities of Huntington Park, as well as down in South Central. We're working on identifying those suspects. In terms of additional ongoing mitigation efforts, we're actually researching technology currently to address open space surveillance and the viability it may have for some of the HOAs in Agoura. And we've also established a two deputy team as well as a sergeant to assist with burglary suppression. One success story, and then I'll finish up, is on January 17th at 11 p.m. Two deputies working the city of Agoura conducted a traffic stop near Canaan Road and Thousand Oaks Boulevard. Deputies observed the suspect discarding narcotics as they conducted that stop. They detained that person, found additional narcotics inside the vehicle, as well as a loaded firearm and loaded magazines inside the car. That concludes my presentation. Do you have any questions?
Lieutenant Foss, I first want to just thank you for giving us the update and also for excellent work recently with these a couple robberies that you were able to kind of pin down who did them and recover some things as well. And I have seen an increased presence in my neighborhood. I live in Morrison, and I know there's been an increased presence of the sheriffs there. So I appreciate that as well. And then all the tips for our residents, I think, was excellent as well. Is there any questions from any council members? Sure.
I thank you for everything you're doing for our city, but I have a quick question. You mentioned something about liability in the open space, and I didn't quite know what you meant by that.
Viability of potential technology to be utilized by the HOAs. So I actually went out to one of your residents this afternoon with one of my sergeants and spoke with her. We've been in communication with some of the other cities regarding kind of remote technology to be used in these open spaces where individuals are accessing backyards of homes that are kind of out of reach of our deputies on patrol.
So you mean like community space, not open space like in the mountains?
Open space primarily between the homes, and generally what we're identifying is that it's HOA property.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. This is very good information, and I want to thank the station also for providing us. I know we, as a council, we get monthly updates from you, but I have had questions from the community if they can get that information. So, I mean, for you to come and publicly share those statistics is wonderful, and I can direct them to this meeting. But is there a way that, because it's my understanding that what we get is internal, are there places where a resident can get these types of statistics? Do they call you directly, or how can they find out this information?
I think Mr. Hamburger and I can coordinate something, possibly to post something on the city website.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you for all you're doing.
Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions for Lieutenant? Thank you very much again for the update. I really
Thanks, sir.
Thank you for everything that you're doing. Next, we're going to move to the update from the Las Virgenes Malibu Council of Governments, and I know Councilmember Sylvester is going to give us an update.
Yes, both myself and Councilmember Wolf attended the meeting virtually on 17th of January. We have a new president. It's Eniko Gold from Hidden Hills, and the elected vice president is Alicia Weintraub from Calabasas. One of the things that was brought up was, which I thought was really interesting, is that on January the 1st, Westlake Village have enforced their banned gas-powered leaf blowers. So I think we should be tracking that to see how successful that is and what kind of results they're getting, because I know it's something that's near and dear to our hearts too. They were talking about adding deputies or finding a way to give more support to the sheriff's station. What I thought was interesting is that Captain Situ said that they are not allowed to, the sheriff's department are restricted in their use of drones, because somebody said, well, can't we have drones in those, behind the houses and the open spaces? And apparently they're only allowed, the sheriff's department is only allowed to use them in cases of like terrorism, things like that. So Captain Situ said one of the ideas they were looking at is something like the wildlife cameras that can detect humans moving through those areas. So that's maybe a possibility, but that's in early stages yet. Okay. We talked about, excuse me, the possibility of the COG sharing grant writing with the Las Vegas Municipal Water District. There's what they call a combing service, which is not a lot of money, and that's somebody that's hired just to search for relevant grants so that we can then decide, is this something that we could pursue? So that may be of interest to us. And then I think we're going to bring forward, do you want me to talk about this or would you like to talk about it? We're going to bring forward to discuss with our council, because a motion was raised to permit the board to take positions on legislation without having our city councils vote first. And I felt that we needed to have our city councils in agreement before we move forward voting at the COG. So I think that's something that's going to come at a future meeting for us to discuss. And other than that, all is well, and we're going to continue on Zoom for the moment, just because it's easier with so many different cities involved to make sure that everybody has a presence.
Thank you.
And if I may, can I just put in a plug, because I also attended the Cultural Arts Council committee meeting, and we're looking for 3 new members. So if there's anybody out there in Agoura that's interested in art and would like to join the Cultural Arts Council, please contact Amy Brink, and the links are on our website. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the update. Mayor Pro Tem.
A couple of things. Can we do a social media push for new members to the Cultural Arts Council? Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Sylvester. About drones in the open space, that's an issue that I would like to come before the council before that's determined. So just keep that in the back of your mind. And Mr. Hamburger, if you can make sure, because now I'm hearing a lot about surveillance and drones in the national park, I would assume. Yeah, and so I just want to make sure that we get to have a conversation about that before any decisions are made. Thank you.
Any other comments? Okay. Are there any reports from staff? No? All right. How about, are there any reports from the city council other than what we've already heard? Okay. Excellent. Next, we'll move to public comments. This section is reserved for persons wishing to speak on items not listed on the agenda that are under the subject matter jurisdiction of the city council. For council chamber attendees, please submit a public comment card to the city clerk. For Zoom attendees, please click the raise hand button on the Zoom toolbar now. Public testimony is limited to 3 minutes per speaker, and a speaker's time may not be transferred to another speaker. Persons addressing the council shall not engage in disorderly conduct that disrupts or otherwise impedes the orderly conduct of the meeting. We respectfully request that if you have something to distribute to the council, you hand it to the city clerk and do not approach the dais. I'll now defer to the city clerk for public comments.
Thank you. The City Council did receive 1 written public comment in advance of the meeting from Malik Tariq Mahmoud Marabi Silsila Imam, representing the Ahmadiyya Muslim community. And then we have speaker cards for in person. Our first speaker will be Nazmi Kwatami. If you could please step up to the podium. Thank you.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I have been living next to the Morrison Ranch Park for 30 years. You know where the Morrison Ranch Park. And I feel that it has been ignored. It has not been serviced. So I called and I talked to a gentleman. His name is Nick. And I said, we have a problem. For 2 months, the service did not come to take care of the park. What's going on? It has been raining, and this, I said, it rained everywhere in Agoura, not just in the park. And come and look at how the residents keep their houses and their lots very clean. And then, you know, so I tried to convince him that it's not done, you know. But anyway, yesterday, the service came in, and they mowed the lawn, and they collected the leaves. Monday, it was so windy that every 15 minutes, my wife comes and said, oh, go and clean in the front of the door. I said, I'm going to clean it. It's going to be the same. It's coming from the park. I mean, I understand it if it was cleaned before, and the event of the wind did that, it's fine. But 2 months, it's a lot. And it's becoming dangerous for little kids, because the shrubs around is about 6 feet high. It has never been touched for 5-7 years. It's so high. I saw one time a coyote coming out of there, a couple of coyotes. They look for rabbits, which is, it's a natural thing. They want to eat. But we don't want to be sure that those are not getting one of the kids. It's really dangerous. So if they could trim those shrubs all the way to the ground, it would be a great idea, because it starts growing in the swale. One of it in the east side, you really have to see it to believe it. I'm not exaggerating. You have to see it. So we would appreciate if somebody, I said, Nick, would you like to come so I show you what's going on? Oh, no, I'll buy the coffee. I'll bring the donuts, whatever it takes. I just need somebody to come and look at it. And I mean it. You really have to see it to see it. It's so bad. And it is. I've been there 32 years, so I love Agoura Hills. And I did something right, because I voted for Jeremy and Deborah, so it's good to see you. So I'm not exaggerating. So I think I know what I'm doing. So we would appreciate it if somebody comes. They could call me. They could come in, and I will meet them there to explain to them, because you really have to see it. You can't do it from the office. It's impossible. And Chris also, I remember. Yeah, Chris was, yeah, it's good to see you here. But I really appreciate it. I appreciate your time. And if somebody would come there and just look at it, because even when they have the service, they just come mow the lawn and leave. They don't touch anything else.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you very much. And I'll keep you updated. Next time there is a meeting, I'll come by and to see if something done about it or not.
If you have a minute afterwards, or to be able to speak to somebody,
sure.
I think Amy Brink might be able to talk with you,
sure.
too, just to be able to try to address some of this.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is...
Quick question.
Sorry.
I didn't quite hear what area, what street this was.
Yeah,
Morrison
Ranch
Park.
Park.
Okay, thank you.
Our next speaker is Douglas Crucian, followed by Jody Reagan.
Pull that speaker up to you, just that'll help everybody hear you. Well,
I'm pretty loud, so I think I think we'll do fine. My name is Douglas Crucian. I'm a professional homeowner advocate, a property-owning Agoura Hills constituent, a member of the Annandale Homeowners Association, and also happen to be the CFO of Annandale Townhouse. I'm speaking tonight regarding the waste management item from your meeting on the 11th and my subsequent correspondence dated the 19th. I hope you all had a chance to read it. Following my letter to you, I was provided a copy of Waste Management's October 29, 2022 Rate Adjustment Review Letter addressed to Mr. Saleha, and will refer to it tonight. In summary, Waste Management requested a 3% CPI increase of their 2023 service rates, and you approved it. It's understandable and expected. Waste Management requested a 27% increase to what they refer to as valet service rates imposed on Annandale householders. To quote Waste Management, this service is for our customers who require an additional truck separate from the regular collection vehicle to move the collection containers to street level for service. You, my friends, have been lied to. Ms. Sandra Persley perpetuated the same lie when she spoke at your last meeting. I'm a customer. My children are capable of moving our collection containers. I don't want valet service at this time, but Waste Management won't let me or my neighbors cancel the service. In fact, I'm in active litigation against Waste Management over the very issue. There is no additional truck separate from the regular collection vehicle that moves anything in Annandale. There's a co-pilot riding around every day, every Thursday in the big truck who hops out, rolls the containers 25 feet, and rolls them back after they're empty. Please do not allow this fee to be increased above the 3% CPI adjustment. Waste Management requested, quote, memorialization of 3-cart rate for townhomes and condominiums. Under this heading, you were lied to and misled. Waste Management acknowledges, and I quote, as a result of the requirements under SB 1383, residents and businesses with 2-cart service are required to have 3-cart service, including trash, recycling, and now organics. As of August 2022, Waste Management has provided this expanded service to multifamily cart customers formerly without green waste collection. Let me provide some truth. Waste Management has not provided this service to Annandale, despite their acknowledged legal requirement. In fact, I'm in active litigation against Waste Management over this very issue. Further, pursuant to Municipal Code Section 5335, they are required to provide green waste containers, quote, at no additional cost to the householders. Thus, there should not be any rate adjustment being requested, let alone granted. Waste Management requested to establish a bin service contamination and overage charge of $75 per incident after 3 warnings, as it relates to SB 1383 green waste compliance. Annandale householders cannot comply with that because they are not provided the bins. And now Waste Management wants you to approve fines for non-compliance. That's insane. Management requested a contract extension until 2027. I'm quite displeased that you chose to rubber stamp their request, considering the outright liars they have proven themselves to be and the increasing service rates year over year, when Athens has shown that they are committed to the Conejo Valley and have lower rates than Waste Management. While Mr. Saleha refuses to participate in dialogue regarding these concerns, it's my hope that members of the council will make time to discuss these concerns with minds wide open and with the wool removed from your eyes. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments.
Our next speaker is Jody Reagan.
Hello. Okay. I timed myself, so I should be right at 3 minutes. My name is Jody Reagan, and I'm here to invite you and the entire community to a very special event. Boy Scout Troop 127 and the Las Virgenes Scouting Alumni Association are hosting a special day to honor retired National Park Service Volunteer Coordinator Mike Malone. Since 1999, Mr. Malone, as he is known, has mentored 109 Boy Scouts on their Eagle projects at various locations throughout the Conejo Valley. Projects included building fences at Paramount Ranch, native plant restoration and installing trail markers at Rancho Sierra Vista in Newbury Park, building picnic tables at Peter Strauss Ranch, and trail repair in Cheeseboro National Park. My son Justin did his Eagle project with Mr. Malone in 2009 in, we miss it, Western Town in Paramount Ranch. Mike taught the teens how to put together a work plan, fundraise for the necessary materials, and recruit and supervise teen and adult volunteers. What Mike taught them are life skills and have stayed with them far past the end of the project. These young men and their parents, us included, are grateful for the patience and care that Mike showed them. Now, after living in California for 27 years, Mike is relocating to New York to be near his family. He does his last Eagle project this weekend at Paramount Ranch for Troop 127. So before he leaves, Scouting wants to express its appreciation for all he has done and all he has meant to the local community, to Scouting, and in particular to Eagle Scouts. We're calling the event Scouting Salute to Mike Malone. It will be held Sunday, February 26, 2 to 4 p.m. at Paramount Ranch around the train station. This event is open to everyone in the community, but pre-registration through online ticket sales is required. The admission price includes entertainment, non-alcoholic and alcoholic drinks, and a trip to the steaming burger food truck. This is the same one that was at the Ray's Adobe Days. Thank you, Amy, for their contact information. She's not here. In addition, the event is also a fundraiser and membership drive for the Las Virgenes Scouting Alumni Association, a tax-exempt nonprofit organization founded in 2016 with 3 main objectives. 1, to promote and benefit Scouting in Los Angeles and Ventura counties. 2, to charter Scouting units in alignment with the policies of the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts of America. And 3, to work with Scouting units to enhance youth character development and promote service to the communities the units serve. So this event will be an excellent time for members of the community who have benefited from all the improvements to our local areas that these Eagle Scouts have done, the opportunity to thank Mr. Malone in person. Again, it's Sunday, February 26th, 2 p.m. at Paramount Ranch. So for tickets, it's bit.ly/Malone Paramount. Discounted admission price for those who join the association at the time of purchase. So don't delay, as there are limited number of tickets available and sales end February 15. No sales at the event. For more information or to contact our association, go to lvscoutingalum.org. And I have flyers I'm going to give Ms. Rodriguez to give you guys. So I look forward to seeing you all there. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you very much for all the time that you give for the Scouts. And I know how important that is. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have no further in-person speakers. I'll now defer to staff for any remote participants. Amber?
Yes, Mayor Anstead, there are hands raised to speak on this item. Before we begin live testimony, if you have your hand raised but do not intend to speak on this item, please take a moment now to click on the lower hand tab on your screen. Requests to speak must be received prior to the mayor closing the public comment portion of the item. Speakers will be called in the order they appear on my screen. Public comments are limited to 3 minutes per speaker. A 30-second notice will be provided by the clerk, and the microphone will be muted when the 3 minutes have expired. Prior to speaking, please clearly state your first and last name and provide your city of residence for the record. Our first speaker is Marisol Espinoza. Go ahead, Marisol.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council members, city staff, and residents of Agoura Hills. I'm Marisol Espinoza. I am a Public Affairs Manager for SoCalGas in the city of Agoura Hills. And I'm just here, I know I was here about a year ago to talk about winter gas bills, and I wanted to just share additional information. You have probably seen your bills or you're getting them soon. The natural gas prices have been higher than usual this January due to several unprecedented factors beyond our control. Customers are seeing winter natural gas bills double or higher compared to 1 year ago. And this is really a result of historically high natural gas prices in the western U.S. SoCalGas doesn't set the price for natural gas. Instead, natural gas prices are determined by national and regional markets. We buy that gas in those markets on behalf of residential and small business customers, and the cost of buying that gas is billed to customers with no markup, meaning that SoCalGas does not profit from the gas commodity prices going up. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, there are a number of factors contributing to these higher natural gas commodity prices. These include widespread below normal temperatures on the West Coast, including Washington and Oregon, high natural gas demand for heating by customers in areas with below normal temperatures, reduced natural gas supplies to the West Coast from Canada and the Rocky Mountains, as well as reduced interstate pipeline capacity to the West Coast because of pipeline maintenance activities in West Texas, and low natural gas storage levels on the West Coast. We do have some tips for our customers to help them reduce their energy bills, and some of these include lowering your thermostat 3 to 5 degrees if your health permits, installing proper caulking and weather stripping, which could save roughly 10 to 15% on heating and cooling bills, washing your clothes in cold water, reducing the temperature on your water heater, and limiting the use of non-essential natural gas appliances like spas, pool heaters, and fireplaces. For more information, you can visit socalgas.com/manage higher bills. But I also wanted to just make a brief mention of some of our customer programs that we offer to help income qualified customers through bill assistance, forgiveness programs, home improvement assistance, as well as a level pay program. And that can also be found at socalgas.com/assistance. We also have a gas assistance fund, which is a program that helps income qualified customers pay their natural gas bills. And that can be found at the same website. Just wanted to share information with the community. If you or any member of the community has any questions, you can reach out to me directly at 818-551-7144, or our customer call center has been receiving calls and are happy to help customers walk through their bills, walk through some of these programs as well. And that's 877 4227, I'm sorry, 877 800 427 2200. Apologies. Thank you so much, and it's great to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We do have
Thank you, Mayor Ariston.
we do have a question.
I just want to make sure, because it was very difficult to hear what she was saying in the chambers. Are our residents who are watching online, do they hear a clear voice?
I can hear it clear, and I'm on Zoom.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure.
You're welcome.
Okay, no other questions?
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Anstead. There are no further hands raised to speak on this item.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to move to the consent calendar. This section is reserved for persons wishing to speak on items on the consent calendar. For council chambers attendees, please submit a public comment card to the city clerk. For Zoom attendees, please click the raise hand button on the Zoom toolbar now. Public testimony is limited to 3 minutes per speaker, and a speaker's time may not be transferred to another speaker. We respectfully request that if you have something to distribute to the council, you hand it to our city clerk and do not approach the dais. I will now defer to the city clerk for public comments.
Thank you, Mayor Anstead. No written public comments have been received and no speaker cards have been submitted. I'll now defer to staff for any remote participants.
Thank you, Mayor Anstead. No hands are raised to speak on this item.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the city council on the consent calendar? Okay. I will now call for a motion and a second to adopt the consent calendar. Will the maker of the motion and the second state your names?
Councilmember Buckley Weber moves to approve tonight's consent calendar.
Thank you. Second?
Councilmember Wolf will second.
Thank you. Now I'll defer to the city clerk for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Lopez?
Aye.
Councilmember Sylvester?
Aye.
Councilmember Wolf?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Buckley Weber?
Aye.
Mayor Anstead?
Aye.
Mayor Anstead, you have approval 5-0.
Thank you. We'll now move to the public hearing section. Our next item is a public hearing to consider amending the Agoura Hills Municipal Code to add a new Chapter 10 regarding short-term rental regulations. I will now defer to Community Development Director Denise Thomas for the staff presentation.
Good evening. I'm Denise Thomas, the Community Development Director. I am happy to bring forward to the council this evening our short-term rental proposal, our draft ordinance. Our senior planner, Robbie Nesevic, is the project manager and will be offering you a presentation, and we're available to answer any questions that you may have at the end of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Denise. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and members of the City Council. Tonight, we are going to discuss the proposed short-term rental ordinance, which, if approved, will amend Article 6 of the Agoura Hills Municipal Code to add a new Chapter 10 regarding short-term rental regulations. Staff is also recommending the City Council make a determination of exemption under the California Environmental Quality Act because the ordinance would impose regulations that limit the environmental impact of residential use of property compared to those currently in place and does not require the expansion of any existing facilities. A short-term rental ordinance was one of this year's budget goals as set by the City Council, and the item did not go to the Planning Commission because it proposes an amendment to the city's municipal code, not the zoning ordinance. So, getting into tonight's agenda, I will be discussing the baseline conditions in the city which prompted the development of a short-term rental ordinance, the reasons why we need to regulate short-term rental businesses, input received from the public and the Land Use and Economic Development Committee, specific regulations proposed by the ordinance, some non-substantive amendments proposed to the ordinance, and followed by our staff recommendation. Next slide, please. The city has received numerous complaints from the public regarding 2 or 3 short-term rental operators, prompting us to consider imposing regulations to limit nuisance impacts. Early in the ordinance development process, city staff reached out to other jurisdictions for recommendations on implementation of the ordinance. A company called Granicus Host Compliance came highly recommended to our staff for their software's ability to identify properties that are not in compliance with local short-term rental regulations. In a preliminary meeting with Granicus, the company had their software identify the baseline conditions within Agoura Hills. At the time of our meeting, there were 47 unique short-term rental businesses operating within the city with a median nightly rate of $395 per night. 95% of listings are for single-family homes, and 83% of listings rent out the entire home as opposed to renting out a portion of the home. These baseline conditions were important for staff to consider when drafting certain policies because we realized that the vast majority of businesses are actually operating without causing nuisance impacts for the community. Next slide, please. This brings us to the topic of why we should regulate short-term rental businesses in the first place. The first reason, which we have already touched on, is nuisance impacts. While we have learned that most businesses are not causing significant nuisance impacts, the certain party houses, which create excessive amounts of noise and parking issues, can be extremely impactful to a residential neighborhood without proper enforcement mechanisms and operating requirements. Since these businesses are not regulated within our current municipal code, it makes nuisance impacts extremely difficult to enforce for our code enforcement officer. Impacted neighbors will often have to call the police or try to ask guests of the short-term rental to quiet down, which has the potential to cause hostility between landlords, guests, and neighbors. Creating a strict code enforcement and reporting mechanism will allow businesses to exist in harmony with surrounding residential uses and will further General Plan Policy LU 7.12, which calls for aggressive code enforcement and nuisance abatement programs to ensure that Agoura Hills neighborhoods remain attractive, safe, and free of public nuisances. Next slide, please. Another reason to regulate short-term rental units is to protect the city's existing housing stock. Local conditions do not suggest that short-term rentals would significantly impact the total housing stock in the city because these properties currently only represent approximately 0.6% of the households within the city. However, if unregulated into the future, short-term rentals could significantly impact affordable units within the city. Tenants may also face eviction or lease termination if a landlord decides to convert a dwelling unit to a short-term rental unit. Implementing policies which would protect renters and the existing housing stock furthers General Plan Policy LU 7.9, which recognizes the city's housing stock as a high priority. Next slide, please. Unregulated short-term rentals also create unfair competition for other lodging businesses because they do not remit transient occupancy tax. Currently, permanent lodging businesses pay a 12% transient occupancy tax to the city. Regulating short-term rentals would provide the city with potential tax revenue to continue to provide a high level of public services to the city's residents, visitors, and employment base, which is consistent with General Plan Policy, or General Plan Goal 82. Next slide, please. Last but certainly not least, the city should regulate short-term rental units in order to maintain public health and safety. It is important that every short-term rental business provide guests with basic health and safety features, such as carbon monoxide detectors and smoke alarms. If left unregulated, we would have no way of knowing whether these features are provided for guests, and the businesses could be operated by anybody. Requiring a business license helps ensure that there is a responsible party when responding to complaints. Proper enforcement mechanisms will also help to reduce conflict between businesses, guests, and the community. Next slide, please. A Land Use and Economic Development Subcommittee meeting, which is known as LUEDC, was held on October 19th, 2022, where staff received feedback from citizens, interest groups, and the LUEDC regarding potential provisions to include in the ordinance. Additionally, 3 project directives were established. The first was to establish minimum operating requirements for short-term rental operators, which will allow the businesses to function within residential neighborhoods without issues. The second was to create enforcement and reporting mechanisms with deterrents to ensure ongoing compliance with the short-term rental operating requirements. And the third was to create application procedures and operational requirements which ensure public health and safety is maintained. Based on the information presented and the public comments received, the LUEDC recommended several regulations, almost all of which have been incorporated into the ordinance. Next slide, please. While most of the provisions recommended by the LUDC were incorporated into the ordinance, I wanted to touch on two of the policies that the LUDC recommended staff to evaluate. The first policy is a cap on the total number of days that a short-term rental business can operate per year. The purpose of this provision is to try and limit the impact that short-term rental businesses may have on surrounding properties. While staff agrees that nuisance impacts should be addressed, this particular type of provision is difficult to enforce because it often requires periodic financial audits of individual businesses, which may result in the need for more staffing resources in order to conduct the audits. Furthermore, the provision would be impossible to enforce in real time. If we were to enforce this provision at the end of each financial quarter, our code enforcement officer may have to issue retroactive violations, which in itself is inherently problematic, and it may also result in the need for more staffing resources. Finally, depending on market conditions, a cap may severely impact the economic viability of short-term rental businesses when the ultimate purpose of the provision is only to limit the nuisance impacts associated with those businesses. Next slide, please. The next policy LUEDC recommended staff evaluate is a minimum 5-day rental term. Similar to an operational cap, this policy is aimed at limiting nuisance impacts, but in reality would likely have a devastating effect on the economic viability of short-term rental units without actually directly regulating the nuisance activities themselves. Furthermore, it may have unintended consequences for members of the community. With an aging population, many people who grew up in Agoura Hills have left the nest and have started families of their own in other places. If these people who grew up here want to come visit for the weekend with their family and stay in a short-term rental unit that has a kitchen and other amenities that a hotel doesn't have, this provision would stop that family from doing that, or could make it cost prohibitive since they would need to rent the unit for 5 consecutive days. For these reasons, we have included a required 2-day rental term, which is consistent with the proposed Los Angeles County short-term rental ordinance as suggested by a public comment submitted at the LUEDC meeting. Staff is confident that the provisions contained in the ordinance, which directly regulate the nuisances themselves, will allow these businesses to operate without issues. Next slide, please. This brings us to the regulations proposed in the ordinance. A business owner wishing to operate a short-term rental will have to submit a business license application to the Community Development Department annually with all of the information listed in Section 61002 of the proposed ordinance, as well as any other information the Community Development Director deems appropriate to administer the chapter. An application fee will be determined by resolution in order to account for the city's monitoring and enforcement costs, in addition to the existing Class A business license fee. All existing businesses will have 90 days from the effective date of the ordinance to obtain a valid business license. Next slide, please. There are several regulations proposed which aim to eliminate party houses and nuisance impacts associated with short-term rental businesses. Some regulations specifically aimed at preventing party houses include a maximum occupancy of 2 people per bedroom plus 2, up to a maximum of 14 people, a quiet hours period between 10 p.m. and 10 a.m., where amplified noise is prohibited and all outdoor noise generated by the guests must meet the decibel limits specified in Section 9656.2 of the Agoura Hills Municipal Code. Prohibitions on special events such as weddings, unless a separate temporary use permit is issued by the Community Development Department allowing the specific use. A 2-night minimum rental term. A requirement to post an exterior notice visible to the public with a 24/7 complaint hotline number. A requirement that at all times a guest is present at the short-term rental, a local contact person shall be available to answer calls from the city's complaint hotline and shall respond to any complaint by telephone within 15 minutes. If the local contact person is unable to reach the guest by telephone or successive complaints are received regarding the conduct of the guests of the short-term rental, the local contact person shall respond in person to the site within 30 minutes to resolve the complaint. Lastly, the operator must provide each guest with a code of conduct which includes occupancy limits, trash cleanup policies, parking requirements, noise limits, and a notice of potential financial penalties for violations of the code of conduct. The notice shall also be posted on the inside of the main entrance door to the short-term rental or on the wall adjacent to the door. Next slide, please. Other nuisance prevention policies included in the ordinance are trash and recycling requirements, a requirement that parking spaces are provided for guests based on the number of bedrooms, and a minimum age requirement of 18 for renters, which is the same age a person is able to sign a contract at a hotel. Next slide, please. A number of policies are included in the ordinance which will ensure public health and safety are maintained, including a prohibition on operating a short-term rental business in a location not approved for use as a dwelling unit, including but not limited to any vehicle, trailer, tent, storage shed, or garage. A requirement that every unit provide functional fire extinguishers, smoke detectors, and carbon monoxide detectors as verified by a third-party inspection every 3 years. An inspection notice which encourages complainants to call the 24/7 hotline. A requirement that the unit's address be visible from the street, and a provision which prohibits short-term rentals on properties with existing code enforcement violations. Next slide, please. The ordinance includes many enforcement and reporting mechanisms which deter property owners from violating the operating requirements. Violations will be subject to the administrative citation provisions contained in the municipal code. However, violations of the short-term rental ordinance would be subject to a fine equal to twice the advertised short-term rentals daily rate per day in violation, which is much more strict than what our current administrative citation provisions provide. Additionally, each subsequent violation within a 12-month period will double the previous fine amount. Upon receiving 3 violations within a year, the Planning and Community Development Director may revoke a business license. When a business license is revoked or an application is denied for failure to meet certain operating conditions or submittal requirements, the owner, operator, or applicant shall not be issued a new short-term rental business license for a minimum of 12 months from the date of the denial or revocation. Next slide, please. In order to protect the city's housing stock and to comply with state law, a structure may not be used as a short-term rental unit if the property has a recorded affordability covenant, affordability deed restriction or agreement restricting its use, including but not limited to accessory dwelling units, junior accessory dwelling units, units constructed under the provisions of Senate Bill 9, and affordability covenants. The ordinance also contains a provision which states that no tenant shall be evicted or lease terminated for the purpose of converting a dwelling unit to a short-term rental. Lastly, in order to prevent a significant proliferation of short-term rental businesses, a single person, corporation, or entity may only be issued one short-term rental business license within the city. Next slide, please. In conclusion, staff believes that the provisions contained in the ordinance will meet the project directives by establishing minimum operating requirements for short-term rental operators, which will allow the businesses to function within residential neighborhoods without issues, creating enforcement and reporting mechanisms with deterrence to ensure ongoing compliance with the short-term rental operating requirements, and creating application procedures and operating requirements which ensure public health and safety is maintained. Staff further recommends that we report this item back to the City Council 6 months after the effective date with an update. This will give us a chance to evaluate our regulations and determine if they successfully curb nuisance impacts associated with short-term rentals. Next slide, please. And to finish up, before we give our recommendation, there are 2 non-substantive amendments that staff is proposing to the ordinance based on recent feedback received. The first is a typo, which incorrectly cites sections 9822 through 9827 of the municipal code, when it should cite section 6822 through 6827. Next slide, please. The second amendment is a clarification on the types of covenants and deed restrictions that the owner needs to make the city staff aware of in a business license application due to state law requirements for those types of units, such as accessory dwelling units and affordable units. The provision would now read that the applicant must submit, quote, written verification that there are no affordability covenants or other affordability deed restrictions on the property that prohibit or limit the use of the dwelling unit as a short-term rental, including but not limited to affordable housing regulatory agreements and accessory dwelling unit covenants. The change is on the screen in legislative format. Next slide, please. And that concludes staff's presentation. Should council choose to adopt ordinance number 23-467, a 3/5 vote is required. And with that, staff respectfully recommends the City Council waive full reading and introduce ordinance number 23-467, amending Article 6, Taxes, Licenses, Business Regulations of the Agoura Hills Municipal Code to add a new Chapter 10 regarding short-term rental regulations and making a determination of exemption under the California Environmental Quality Act. We are now available for any questions.
Thank you for that great presentation.
Mr. Mayor, as someone on the LUEDC, can I add one thing to the staff report?
I'm sorry?
I just want to add one comment to the staff report. Not deliberate, just one clarification.
Why don't we do it and whenever I open it for city council comments, real quick. So before we open the public hearing, does any council member have any questions on the staff presentation? Councilmember Lopez.
Thank you. It's not a question. I just want to let the council know just a little bit of a clarification about this process. So this came to the Land Use Economic and Development Committee, I believe first when Linda Northrup was on, and then in her absence, once she left, Councilmember Sylvester was on. So Councilmember Sylvester and I reviewed this and had quite a bit of feedback. And it actually didn't get to come back to us to hammer it out because then assignments got readjusted, and now Councilmember Wolf is on the LUEDC. And so I just want to make it clear as we go into questions and deliberations that this actually isn't a committee recommendation because unfortunately, because of the Brown Act, we never got it back into the committee to hammer it out. So I just wanted to clarify that before we start talking, that this isn't necessarily a committee recommendation if you feel things are missing and this and that. It's just unfortunately part of the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions of staff? Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you. A couple of things, and I did have an opportunity to speak with Mr. Mesovic and Ms. Thomas earlier in the week. So just to confirm, Section 61004G addresses noise, and I just want to make sure there would be nothing to prohibit us from adding a section about lighting. And what we were kind of thinking is something that, if it's not shielded downward-facing lighting, is that right? There would be nothing to prohibit us from doing something like that so that we could have those lights turn off at 10 o'clock at night.
Thank you. I'm Denise Thomas, Community Development Director. You're correct, Mayor Pro Tem. We recommended that if the council wanted to deliberate on having all lights be downward facing and shielded, that could be an amendment to this ordinance. And for lights that are not downward facing and shielded, they would have to be extinguished at the time the quiet hours ended.
Thank you. And then I just want to confirm another thing we had talked about. Section 61002J talks about an indemnification and hold harmless clause. And you were going to confirm whether or not an attorney's fees provision was within that clause?
Yes, it will be.
Okay, and so I guess my question is, that's for indemnification if something happens and the city is sued. What about an attorney's fees provision if we have to sue the owner because there's been violations and they haven't paid the fees and all of that? So I don't know, that might be a question for the city attorney.
That would already be dictated by statute. I haven't looked at that specific issue with regards to short-term rentals, but generally, if there's an ability to obtain attorney's fees, it would be addressed in those statutes. So there's no need to then put it in the ordinance. If that makes sense.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much. And then let's see, the next question was, is there anything to preclude us? I know you spoke about section 61004E talks about the rental term, and you have it for 2 days, and you mentioned something about 5 days, and I know we talked about that. But is there anything to preclude the council from coming up with a different number than 2? I know that's what LA County does, is a 2-night minimum, but I'm just wondering if there's anything else out there that would stop us from having it be longer than 2.
No, if that's the council's pleasure, you could deliberate on that.
Okay, and then this, I see special event in the definitions, and I didn't bring this up the other day, so I just want to ask you, can you just tell me the process of getting a temporary use permit? So if you want to have a special event at one of these short-term rentals?
Yeah, so you would submit an application for a temporary use permit, and depending on the activities and whether or not they're permitted in that zone, then that would determine whether or not we would issue it. And that process is already within our municipal code. So it's not something that the short-term rental ordinance is changing. So you won't, because of the short-term rental ordinance, you won't see an increased number of special events. It's already allowed within our ordinance.
Okay, great. Thank you. And let's see. And that's it. Thank you.
Councilmember.
Yes, I have quite a few questions because, as Councilmember Klein-Lopez said, I was in at the second meeting, and then we went away, and then all these other ideas came into my head. So forgive me if I just review them all as we're going through it now. First, I know our goal is to balance the property owner's rights with the rights of the residents around them. And so we were trying to find ways to make sure that the residents are protected, but again, property rights are preserved. I just wanted to know if we pass the ordinance and it's contested by a resident, would it go on hold while it's being adjudicated?
I will defer to Candace for that.
So you're asking if we get sued and we take this case to court, would it be on hold? Usually, it depends on what the petitioner or plaintiff asks for. Sometimes they'll ask for the judge to stay the ordinance.
It may happen if we don't pass.
If we don't.
So I'm sorry, if we do pass it and somebody files a lawsuit, it could go on hold.
It's possible, but usually, for example, if you're seeking injunctive relief, there's a certain high standard that you have to meet in order to move the judge to say, okay, yeah, we got to freeze this in place. Okay, so I've not heard of that with regards to short-term rental ordinances.
No, just a question. And then to address your question, we did talk about, the minimum number of nights, but the problem is, what we realized too, is if you say put a 4-night minimum on, then all the property owner has to do is lower the rate. And then they only show up for 2 nights or 1 night. So although in theory it would be nice, to try to stop the party houses, that may not do it anyway, because they would just lower the terms of the rental. Does that make sense? All right, let's see. I wanted to ask a question about the transient occupancy tax. I know it's 12%. But what is it 12% of? Because I was looking at the Airbnb fees, and when they post a rental, then the owner pays 3% to the Airbnb. So would the 12% be based on what their income is, or on what the posted rate on the Airbnb website is? I was just curious.
That's outlined in the transient occupancy tax code, and I believe it's based on the total revenue. So if they charged $100 for the unit, then they would have a $12 transient occupancy tax fee.
Right. So they couldn't say, well, we've already paid 3% to Airbnb, so then we're only going to give you...
Right.
No. Okay, good. All right, thank you. Yes, when we're talking about capping the number of short-term rentals per month or year, which was another resident suggestion, and we know that's going to be really hard for the staff to enforce, which is why we haven't done it. But I was curious, the transient occupancy tax, is it paid monthly or annually? How does that happen?
Quarterly.
Quarterly?
Yes.
So we wouldn't know until the end of a quarter how many they've done anyway?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Oh, right. Now, short-term rental sign is posted on the property by the front door, or if gated in a location, it says visible to the public. Well, visible and readable are 2 different things. So if they have a long garden and you can't see what that sign says, even though it's visible to you. So could we change that to readable to the public? So it's put in an area where the public can actually read what the sign says?
We could change that language.
Okay, thank you. And then when a resident is objecting to something, they call the 24/7 hotline, correct?
That's correct.
And we respond. What's our response time?
So we're going to be using a software with Granicus Host Compliance. So as soon as a complaint comes in, the host compliance software automatically sends a text to.
It rolls over to the operator.
Correct, and it tells them how many minutes they have to respond to the complaint.
Great. So there's no time lag.
Correct.
For our residents. Then I wanted to know, when we give the permits for a short-term rental, and there's a sign that's going to be now posted that's readable to the public, is it possible to list on our website who has short-term rental permits?
I would have to look into that. We definitely could, and we're definitely going to have a website with a public interface. So,
Right.
and it'll instruct the public on how to complain about short-term rental activity. So,
Good, because people could check that against the signs posted, and if there's no sign posted and they see there's a short-term rental going on, they would then be able to contact the city and say, this is not listed, and it seems to be a short-term rental.
It's unclear to me whether, I know for a fact that the addresses for short-term rentals are not readily accessible on the websites. So I don't know whether that's because there's some sort of privacy issue or not. So
Right.
what we promise to do is to take a look at that provision, and when we bring it back 6 months after the effective date, and we give you guys a report, if that is something that we can do and that's an amendment you want us to undertake, then we can do it at that time. But right now, we haven't done that.
Okay, and so to protect privacy, could one just list the name of the street?
The name of the street's available.
So we could put on our website, on this street, Old Carriage Court, there are 4 short-term rentals, or 1, or...
yes, we currently have a map of all the short-term rentals, so we can put that map on our website as well. That kind of has a little.
Well, that would identify the property sites, so to protect
Right.
privacy, if we just had a list of streets.
Well, the ping wouldn't have an actual address, so it would only be in the general location.
Okay, so that's something that we could do so that our residents know it's going on. Thank you. And then HOAs, if they have a no short-term rental, then that puts in, then they can't come and get a permit. Is that correct? I mean, I don't know if any HOAs have even included this, but...
The ordinance, we regulate the properties within the city.
Right.
The HOAs have a private contract between their homeowners and the association. If you are in the city and you have a covenant on your property and you choose to submit for a business license to operate a short-term rental, we would issue you a business license for a short-term rental because the code allows you to have it. If the HOA takes objection to that, then they would have to file a civil suit against the homeowner for violating the contract.
So the city can't say, no, we won't issue you the permit because we don't have HOA approval.
We don't implement the rules of the HOA.
Thank you. And what do residents do if they suspect a property is being used as a short-term rental?
They can just submit a complaint, and our Granicus Host Compliance runs reports on a periodic basis that tries to capture any short-term rentals that are being posted on listing platforms. So that's generally how we're going to be catching unpermitted short-term rental operators.
Good. So and that will be clear on our website.
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much. And that was going to be another question I had. Can properties that are adjacent to short-term rentals be notified once a license has been issued by the city?
Since it's a ministerial action, we don't do noticing for those types.
So they'd have to go to the website.
Correct.
And then they'd be able to see if there's one on their street. And can you just clarify for me, what is the definition of special events?
Let me get to that section. A special event means temporary uses or activities which may be appropriate at specific locations but would be inappropriate on a permanent or periodic basis. Such uses or activities include but are not limited to weddings, outdoor celebrations, and other uses requiring a temporary use permit as defined in Agoura Hills Municipal Code Section 9678.1.
Thank you. Now, my next question is, if they want a special events permit, can we restrict it to just the owner of the property has to apply for that and not just a short-term renter?
The owner of any permit has to sign any application that's submitted to the city. So yes.
So yes, so
in short.
a short-term rental can't just do it on their own. They have to have.
Correct.
Thank you for clarifying that. Let's see. And I know some of our residents have complained about activities that they've been able to view from their gardens that are going on, but we can't constrict because that's private. Correct? They have the right to privacy and to conduct, if it's not a public nuisance.
There are certain privacy rights, so it would be difficult to enforce regulations that are specific to very specific recreational uses.
Right, so if you had, it wouldn't be considered public nudity if there was a stripper on a table in the house next door.
I mean,
I'm just asking. Is that something we can regulate or not? We can after 10 p.m. Well, not if they're doing it in the dark and they're not making any noise.
Yeah.
No, I'm just.
If they're violating any of the other provisions that they're not allowed to do, we'll catch them.
Right. Okay. Good. Thank you. Let's see if I've got all my questions. Right. Yeah. I think that's it for the moment. Thank you so much.
Thank you for those questions. Councilmember Lopez.
Thank you. Well, Councilmember Sylvester asked a lot of my questions, but I do have a few more. I guess my biggest question is really about enforcement. So, for example, on page 3 of the staff report, it says, let me go back to the actual staff report. So it says, for example, restrictions on number 4, restrictions on the ability of an owner to evict an existing long-term tenant for the purpose of converting the dwelling into a short-term rental. I mean, how do we know and how could we enforce that?
That essentially gives just anybody who is evicted an opportunity to point at the code and say, hey, you're not allowed to do this.
So would it turn into a civil case?
we can also request any information that we would require. So we could ask for something like proof that the property hasn't been rented out in the last 3 months, something like that. So
I guess my question is, does that involve us or does that become a civil lawsuit between the two parties? And I guess that would be more for our city attorney.
Well, technically, it's a municipal code provision, so we could enforce that provision. I don't recall what I felt like we had a conversation about this, what staff's intent was on that. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, Robbie. Was it so that they could, fold it into any other civil actions that they were bringing?
Correct, yes.
Okay, so I'm just trying to clarify. I just don't want us to get into the middle of lawsuits that end up being between a renter and a.
If I may.
Yeah.
If someone were to approach us and say, I was evicted because they wanted to turn my dwelling into a short-term rental, the extent of our involvement would be we would probably revoke that permit, or we would begin proceedings. It's a violation of the municipal code. So we wouldn't necessarily be able to keep the person in their home. What we would do is say, you are using this for a short-term rental and you're not permitted to do that under these circumstances. And then that action, if they choose to take that notice of violation or that action forward to LA County's Renters Association advocates, then they would be able to use that as evidence. But we would not be in the middle.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Thank you. And also with enforcement, so, my focus here is really less on the families that are coming back to visit and want a kitchen for the weekend, because unfortunately I feel like we're going to have to write this for the bad apples. That's why we're here. So can you tell me the chain of events if we have someone who is violating the policies and we give them warnings and we revoke their business license and we fine them and they're still operating? What is our recourse on that? Do we take them to our prosecutor? How does that play out to the nth degree is my question.
So we have the option to, if you violate our code today, whether it's short-term rental or anything, we issue you a notice of violation, and then after the notice of violation, if you're still violating our code, we will issue you an administrative citation, and the administrative citations escalate in the fine value escalates over time. We also have the ability to refer any violation to the prosecutor's office, and then the prosecutor has the ability to determine whether we are going to file a civil suit or a criminal suit against you. Every violation of our code is a misdemeanor offense, and so that's how we handle all other enforcement in the city, and that's how we would handle this. If you choose to operate short-term rental and you're not licensed to do so, or you're violating our code, then we will use our tools to come for you.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And then my last question on enforcement really has to do, we received a public comment today, a letter from Better Neighbors LA and Unite Here Local 11. And their concern was that this ordinance was just not as enforceable as they would like to see it. And they said that, let me find what it says. Unfortunately, I can't highlight this letter, and it didn't come to us early enough, but it says that the proposed ordinance is unlikely to be effectively enforceable due to the many ambiguities, and it seems to relate around the number of people who own and operate. So I know in this ordinance, it's saying that it says one person, let me read it to you. I have it on page 6 of the staff report. No, apologies. Page 6 of the ordinance, D. It says a person may operate, but may not be the owner of more than one short-term rental within the city limits. So my concern is, how do we ensure that, we don't have the, thank you, the proliferation of, these operators across town that are reaching out to owners or this or that. It seems to me that that's one of their concerns in this letter.
I had an opportunity to review the letter at the beginning of the presentation, or the beginning of the city council meeting, and I believe that we believe that we do have the ability to do it. We may not be able to restrict who buys what property, but we do have the ability to only issue a business license to the owner of the one owner. And the reason we say operators is because if you hire a management company and that management company is responsible for more than one owner's unit, then they essentially would be an operator for more than one property. However, we would require, as part of the application, the owner of the property to disclose who they are, the owner of the property to sign, and we would only issue a permit to one owner of one property. You can own 7, 8, all the houses in Agoura Hills, but you may only have one business license to operate a short-term rental.
Okay.
Did that answer?
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that caught my eye in this letter is that they're talking about the regulation of the platform accountability. So I'm guessing that's like Airbnb or VRBO, or there are other. From what I understand, you know, if you cut off the head of one vendor of one platform, 7 others pop up, and so there are many platforms that people can surreptitiously list their properties on that we have a hard time keeping up with. So, you know, and again, we didn't really have the chance to delve into that at the committee level, but what are your thoughts on the ability for regulation of platform accountability, making sure that they're accountable as well?
Well, I'll start the answer, and then I'll let Robbie finish the answer because Robbie did all the research. Granicus host compliance is probably the industry standard for platforms or companies that work with local governments to identify and ferret out where you may post your sites. I honestly didn't know until we had the meeting that there were over 200 places where you could list your site, but Granicus Host Compliance knows. I didn't know we had 47 unique properties in the city, but Granicus Host Compliance knows. And so what I read that provision to suggest is that we hold accountable those websites for posting unpermitted short-term rentals. Well, that's very difficult for me to enforce, very difficult for us to prosecute. However, we can use our enforcement resources, holding accountable the person who is local, who is responsible for the action. And so that's where we've chosen to place our energy. So the violation isn't necessarily, oh, someone is too loud and you need to send staff out there. No, we're holding accountable the person that owns the property. They have 15 minutes to call in. If they don't, that's a violation. They have 30 minutes to show up. If they don't address it, that's a violation. You have 3 violations. We have the ability to revoke your short-term business license, and you won't get it back for at least 12 months. And so that, we feel, addresses locally what our issues are rather than swinging at Airbnb or VRBO. Maybe we could post notices on there, and maybe that would deter people from using them as an option, but that isn't necessarily going to help the neighbor that is listening to loud music at night. And so we chose to put our resources toward that rather than the websites.
Okay, thank you. And of those 47 that we learned about, we know how to contact them to let them know if and when this ordinance passes?
Yes, so once the ordinance passes, we would work with Granicus Host Compliance to find the addresses and send out notices.
Okay, and then my last question is, you've got the 6-month mark on there for if we want to revise the ordinance at all. Why did you pick 6 months, and what would be the time frame from that 6 months to get any? You know, I'm all game for like trying this out, and if we see that there are holes or this or that, you know, what would be the time frame to get any changes to the ordinance built in?
The 6-month period from the time it was adopted, we felt would give us an opportunity to get everybody licensed and to get some experience with them so that we can identify kind of what our pressure points are and what the issues are. It would also give us an opportunity, once those issues are identified, to work with the prosecutor's office and the city attorney's office to maybe craft some language that we think would address the Agoura Hills specific issues that still are taking place. If you wanted to do it for less than 6 months, we could do it. We just felt like 6 months would give us a body of information that would where you could make prudent decisions. But I'm not married to 6 months. If you want to do less, that's fine. And then how soon would it work? It would have to go through the same process. So we're going to introduce it tonight, and if you agree to introduce it and approve it, we'll come back for a second read. At some point, we'll come back with a resolution with the fees, and then 30 days, I believe, from the date of the second read, the ordinance becomes effective. So you would go through that same process in 6 months. So theoretically, it would take 45 days from when you ask us to draft it.
Perfect. Okay, great. Thank you so much. Those are all my questions.
Great, thank you. I have a few questions as well. The first one is how, and it might be in the report, and I looked a few times, but I couldn't find it, but how are we defining a bedroom? Is there anything specific?
That's defined in the building code, so we would defer to the building code for what a bedroom is.
Okay, so it's the same as in the building code for this. Okay, thank you. And then for my understanding, I wasn't clear on the ADU. So if there's an ADU on the property, then it cannot be a short-term rental?
The ADU itself cannot be used as a short-term rental because when somebody gets an ADU permit, then they actually sign a covenant that says that they aren't going to rent it for 30 days, for less than 30 days, I should say. So.
But the other property can be, but the ADU cannot be?
That's correct.
Okay, understood. Thank you. And then I talked with city staff about this question today, but I wanted to ask it again. So if there were a film shoot, they would, to rent it out, they would have to require a special permit for filming it. And that process, so it's more of a, yeah, is that correct?
Yes, and any filming requires its own film permit, regardless of how big or small the film is, so that it already goes through its own film permit process.
Okay, great, because I know that that can sometimes be a problem. Another question is there any possibility to add into this, and I don't know if it's realistic or something to talk to council about limiting outdoor fire use and bonfires? I don't know if that's even enforceable, or have you seen any other communities do anything like that?
The only communities I've seen have specific bans like that are, the communities that are out in the wilderness. But we can certainly take a look at that for outdoor bonfires. Typically, right now, we would just defer to whatever the fire code says and whether or not an activity is approved or not approved.
And if I can add to that, one of the comments that during the LUEDC meeting, one of the residents raised an issue or a comment that they witnessed people who were twirling fire in the very high fire hazard severity zone. That is contrary to our burn bans, that's contrary to the fire code. So if something like that were to happen, they would call host compliance and say they're twirling fire in my backyard, I need you to do something. The operator or owner would have 15 minutes to reply back, 30 minutes to show up to the site, and if they don't, that's a violation, and the fire department or the police department could be called, but that would be a violation and we would be aware of it. But the intent of this is that we specifically have language in there that says you can't do things that would be against the fire code, so that we would have a mechanism for issuing notices of violation.
Okay, thank you. And then my last is more of a recommendation. I don't know if this is the right time to make a recommendation or if I should hold off. But I would like to see, not in the code, but maybe to make sure that we share, that all short-term rentals share the city's social media, the Lost Hills Sheriff Station, the local fire department, all pertinent emergency response information in every home.
Yeah, we can certainly put that on our website.
Posted
in the code of conduct?
In the actual home.
Okay, we can add that.
Okay, great. And the platform accountability was another question, but that was answered, but I just wanted to reiterate that, and those are my only questions right now. Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have follow-up if you don't.
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, great. The two follow-up questions. One was to Councilmember Klein Lopez's. She had raised the issue of how would we know how many properties and who's purchased what. If each property is purchased by a different LLC in a different name, will we have the ability to check? They could list a different principal, so I'm not sure how we would do that.
Yeah, so they would have to list a corporate principal with the state, and we would look at the state and who's listed as as the owner of the LLC.
And if there was, Joe Smith is one owner of the LLC, and Sam Brown is another one owner of an LLC, and Janice White is another owner, so they could just record it that way, and they could own 3 properties, and they could all 3 have a business license, or is that?
The provision also says anybody acting as a unit. So if anybody was acting as a unit and we had a way to find out that they were, then we would be able to issue a violation for that as well.
Okay, thank you. And then, I actually remembered that I totally gave up on looking for the definition of a bedroom, and I'm sitting here and I'm giving up again. I can't seem to maneuver very well around our municipal code, so would you mind taking a minute and seeing if you can give me a definition of a bedroom?
It would be in the building code, not the municipal
that.
code.
Okay,
It's so,
I tried
and
both.
I believe, and that would be the state building code. And if I'm not mistaken, it has to be a habitable area with a closet, if
That
that's
was
what I
my
remember
problem.
correctly.
I was looking for, state building code, so, okay, that's a whole different thing. Thank you.
Only 2 follow-up questions. One is, if we've revoked the license and they rent out the property and there are guests in the property, even though the license has been revoked, if a neighbor complains, can we send the sheriffs in to remove the guests? What happens?
Yes, so we can certainly call the sheriff. Of course, at that point, it would be host compliance and the 24/7 hotline working together with the manager of the property. Presumably, the manager would not want to receive a violation. So once they realize that they would not be operating, then in other jurisdictions' experiences, the managing agent actually calls the sheriff. But yes, any complaining party would be able to call the sheriff at any time.
And just have the guests removed completely?
That's correct.
Okay, and then one last question. All the rules for renters, they're presented to the renters when they sign the lease, and then they're posted in the house. Is there a way to request that all those rules and regulations are posted wherever the property is listed online so that people know before they even think, oh, well, I'll go to Agoura, they'll see how strict we are and maybe won't even consider the property?
Yes, our regulations require them to notify the person renting before they come and rent and
Before they actually rent the property?
Before they occupy the property, and whatever form that takes, whether it's on the listing platform or whether they agree to the rental terms and then they say here's the code of conduct, but they're required to provide that in writing.
Okay, so if they could, but they provide it before they actually sign any contract, correct?
Correct.
Right. Thank you very much.
Councilmember, or Mayor Pro Tem Buckley Weber, do you have further questions? You still
No, I'm still trying to find it, but if I do, if somebody else can find it for me, that would be helpful.
Okay. All right. I think everybody, go ahead. Councilmember Wong.
One more quick question, and this is regarding a letter sent in by the old Agoura community. Can we talk about why it's not practical to limit the frequency, and why that doesn't seem to be feasible? Because we would the answer to my question is that we would retroactively have to monitor that, and that's just not feasible?
Correct. So there's a few reasons. So the first is that we would have to retroactively issue violations at the end of the quarter when they submit their TOT. And a lot of times that would also require us to do a financial audit to confirm how many days that they're actually operating for. So if you take those combined, it might actually require us to have more staffing resources than what we currently have to be able to monitor and issue violations for that.
And I would also like to add that if you create a regulation, the expectation is that you're going to be able to enforce that regulation. And retroactive regulations aren't necessarily enforceable. Our prosecutor may not be able to enforce it. And so if the issue is we want to regulate the nuisance impacts, we went heavy on regulating the nuisance impacts. If the issue is you don't want people to be there more than a certain number of days out of the year, that becomes more challenging. For instance, a neighbor could see someone at the house and they never saw them before, but it could be a relative who's not paying. And the expectation of that neighbor is, well, they've exceeded. So in the middle of the 120-day period, they may have 150 tick marks saying, I've seen people here 150 tick mark times, but that's not necessarily evidence that we can use to prosecute someone. So generally speaking, when you receive regulations from the Community Development Department, we try our best to make sure that if we give you the expectation that there's a regulation, you feel comfortable that we can actually enforce it. In the 120 days, we spent some time with the prosecutor trying to figure out, is it possible? And with all the additional costs and the limitations on staff, we just didn't see a way, so we didn't recommend it.
Thank you.
I think everybody asked their questions. Yep, good. All good. So I think I've just got a couple questions to follow up. First question, actually, Robbie, I wanted to ask you about is, when we were drafting this, what do we look at the local cities? And currently, can you tell me like which ones they were and whether there's similar provisions to the one that we have in front of us?
Yes, we looked at dozens of cities. So we looked at Malibu, Calabasas, San Diego. I think you recommended one. I forget what the name was, but we looked at that one as well. Okay. Palm Springs. We looked at a lot.
Thank you. And when you did that, the transient occupancy tax, do most of them have that included in their cost or in their ordinances?
Yes, 100% of them.
That's good to know. And was there a common number of days for most of them that you looked at, or not, for the number of days they had to minimally rent? And the ones that are local?
The only ones that we saw were two for the minimum rental term.
Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. How about the question I had on the parking spaces? So the municipal code already requires specific number of parking spaces per bedroom. Why did we feel it was necessary to kind of add additional provision on that?
Because we've received a lot of parking complaints. Well, I wouldn't say a lot, but not compared to the noise. But we just wanted to make sure that there was adequate parking to accommodate guests of short-term rentals. So that's the primary reason. We don't want streets to be overflowing. So as part of the code of conduct, we would like also the managing agent or operator to also let them know park in the parking spaces that you have instead of parking on the street first. So that's the purpose of it.
Got it. Thank you. Let's see if most of the rest of them were answered. I think that those are the main questions I had. Thank you very much. Move on. Okay. Written public comments were requested to be emailed in advance of tonight's meeting. If you wish to speak, please click the raise hand button on the Zoom toolbar now. Public testimony is limited to 3 minutes per speaker, and a speaker's time may not be transferred to another speaker. We respectfully request that if you have something to distribute to the council, you hand it to our city clerk and do not approach the dais. I will now open the public hearing, and I'll defer to the city clerk for public comments.
Thank you. Written comments were received and distributed prior to the meeting this evening from the following: Jess Thomas, President, representing Old Agoura homeowners; George Coleman, Agoura Hills; Kathy Creech, Agoura Hills; Carolyn Tricino, Agoura Hills; Danielle Borgia, President, CEO, representing the Greater Conejo Valley Chamber of Commerce; Cindy Bankler, Agoura Hills; and Nancy Hanna, representing Better Neighbors LA, and Danielle Wilson, representing Unite Here Local 11. We also have some in-person public speakers. Kathy Creech, followed by Mike Wilkin. Yes, please step up to the podium. Thank you.
Hello, Mr. Mayor and City Council members and everyone else. I'm back. My name is Kathy Creech. I live at 5709 Fairview Place in Old Agoura, and we share property with one of the big party houses. And we have had the naked pole dancers in the back, and we've had multiple times fire jugglers So these things do happen. You guys answered almost all of my questions that I had. My one thing I really feel very strongly about is it should be at least a 3-night minimum. I have rented Airbnbs many times, and it's not uncommon to have a 3-night minimum. 2-night minimum is Friday night, Saturday night, they're done. Loud noise both nights. 3-night minimum, I think, would maybe slow it down a little bit. So my other questions were all about how would the owners be notified of when this ordinance and when the ordinance would start. So I realized that there's still more work to do. The special events thing, I feel like it's kind of contradictory. Like it says no special events, and then it says if you can get a permit, you can have a special event. And if you can only have 14 people at the house, but you could have a wedding or a bachelor party or bachelorette, with a lot of people for the special event, that kind of takes away from the 14-person minimum or maximum. So that was a question I wasn't quite sure on. So that was it, because you answered all my other questions. Thank you. Okay.
Our next speaker is Mike Wilkin.
Good evening. My name is Mike Wilkin. I'm president of Liberty Parkside HOA. We're a small HOA with 38 homes at the end of Liberty Canyon Road. We're adjacent to the Santa Monica Mountain open space. Almost 2 years ago, a homeowner was renting their entire home as a short-term rental. The short-term rentals would be on weekends, 2, 3, and sometimes 4 nights. Since it was a 4-bedroom home, 8 to 10 guests would stay there. Sometimes parties with more than 20 people would occur in the evening, causing noise late into the night and morning. The sheriff was called multiple times by neighbors. The sheriff's presence would calm things down, but this was repeated on multiple weekends. The HOA informed the homeowner the CC&R stayed no rental of less than 30 days, and the homeowner was directed to cease and desist. The homeowner denied there were any issues, saying those were the homeowner's friends at the home, even though the sheriff came by and the homeowner was not there. The HOA engaged legal counsel on next steps that could be taken. Our small HOA spent thousands and thousands of dollars on legal counsel due to this one homeowner. Eventually, the homeowner stopped renting the entire home as a short-term rental through the efforts of the HOA board and legal counsel, but continues to rent out a room as a short-term rental. This homeowner has multiple homes that are listed as short-term rentals in the area. It is a primary business for this homeowner, who can easily move from home to home based on whether a home is being rented or not. The homeowner has also rented the home out for events. The HOA was able to find the homeowner's listing on the internet sites that cater to renting properties for events. The HOA informed the homeowner to cease and desist, but only after legal counsel was again brought in. The disruption the homeowner caused to our quiet neighborhood was horrible. Homeowners were furious with the HOA because they thought the HOA wasn't representing them. The HOA was acting as well as we could within the laws of California and the Davis-Sterling Act. Regarding the laws of California, California Assembly Bill 3182 went into effect January 1st, 2021. The purpose was to make homes available to renters who may have been unable to access more affordable housing due to stringent association rules. Assembly Bill 3182 does not allow for renting a home for less than 30 days if the homeowner does not occupy the home. A room for rent in the home or adjacent ADU is allowed. Agoura Hills should follow the California law and only allow a room or ADU to be rented as a short-term rental with maximum occupancy specified. Renting the entire home as a short-term rental is reducing the availability of long-term housing. This is contrary to what California is trying to achieve with their housing goals. There is no benefit to expanding short-term rentals beyond this. Agoura Hills has 723 hotel rooms. Short-term rentals take revenue away from the hotels that support our community. The drawbacks to short-term rentals is the disruption to our neighborhood and quality of life. Thank you.
Thank you for the comments. Appreciate it.
Thank you. We have no further in-person speaker cards. We'll now defer to staff for any remote participants. Amber?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Anstead. There are hands raised to speak on this item. Before we begin live testimony, if you have your hand raised but do not intend to speak on this item, please take a moment now to click on the lower hand tab on your screen. Requests to speak must be received prior to the mayor closing the public comment portion of the item. Speakers will be called in the order they appear on my screen. Public comments are limited to 3 minutes per speaker. A 30-second notice will be provided by the clerk, and the microphone will be muted when the 3 minutes have expired. Prior to speaking, please clearly state your first and last name and provide your city of residence for the record. Our first speaker will be the Conejo Chamber. I believe it's Adam Haverstock. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yes, it's Adam. Thank you, Mayor Anstead and council members. My name is Adam Haverstock. I'm the Director of Government Affairs and Tourism for the Greater Conejo Valley Chamber of Commerce. I'm here to speak in support of this short-term rental ordinance this evening. First, a big thank you to staff who reached out to us at the Chamber and included us in the discussion as this program was developed. The Chamber's Executive Committee considered this issue and decided to submit a letter of support that is hopefully in your packet. It sounds like it was in the written comments. I will just touch on a few of the key points. As you know, the city of Agoura Hills has 5 hotels with a collective 723 rooms available for short-term rent. These hotels are regulated by the city and the state and are required to pay transient occupancy tax to the city. Residential short-term rentals generally have not been subject to the same requirements. We think this ordinance is not so overly burdensome that it would hurt the short-term rental business, but it does have the effect of leveling the playing field for similar business types, that being hotels and residential short-term rentals. Let me be clear, residential short-term rentals fill an important need in the community and provide a lodging option that is unique and necessary and not filled by our hotels. What this ordinance does is treat them like other similar businesses within the city, which is a good thing. We believe this ordinance is an excellent compromise between having appropriate government oversight, but also allowing room for business owners to operate. Please approve this short-term rental ordinance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam. Our next speaker is Allison Kirsty, followed by Layal Bata. Go ahead, Allison.
Hello, my name is Allison Kirsty. I live in the city of Los Angeles, and I'm with Better Neighbors LA, a coalition of housing activists, hospitality workers, and neighbors with the shared goal of protecting housing across Southern California from conversion into tourist accommodation. We're here today to request that the Agoura Hills City Council reject the proposed ordinance to provide the planning department with more time to make effective adjustments to the ordinance. We believe that more stringent protections will ultimately ensure that housing remains available for residents across the city. In a written comment, we provided the council several examples of the dangers that short-term rentals can pose in a community, which range from nuisance and litter to loss of affordable housing units and displacement. Strong short-term rental regulations that limit how many short-term rentals one host may operate and include clear enforcement mechanisms to disincentivize violators are necessary to protect the cities of Agoura Hills' housing stock. We recommend that the city limit the number of short-term rentals that one host may operate to 1, as this is the best way to prevent commercial operators from converting housing units into what are essentially de facto hotel rooms. In addition to 1 rental per owner, we believe that the city should disallow third-party commercial hosts who are unlikely to be concerned about the well-being of the community. We also recommend that the city include regulations of short-term rental platforms in order to hold companies like Airbnb, VRBO, and HomeAway accountable, as this is done in the city of Los Angeles and other cities across Southern California. Regulations of short-term rental platforms, such as fines for each unlawful short-term rental booked, will provide the platforms with incentive to ensure that the listings on their sites are in compliance with the law. We're happy to meet with council and planning staff to further discuss our experiences with short-term rental regulations across the state and offer expertise on the matter. We hope that you do the right thing tonight and require that these regulations are strengthened and that ambiguities are removed in order to best protect housing and neighborhood character in Agoura Hills. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Allison. Our next speaker is Layal Bata, UH Local 11. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Leah Albata. I'm speaking on behalf of Unite Here Local 11, the Hotel and Service Workers Union for all of Southern California, but I reside in Los Angeles. We urge you to take more time to consider an effective short-term rental policy. Our union has been working with housing organizations and coalitions like Better Neighbors Los Angeles to figure out the most effective regulations to mitigate the impacts of short-term rentals. STRs are particularly insidious for our members, most of whom are immigrant housekeepers, dishwashers, and cooks, who are increasingly impacted by the housing prices, getting pushed further and further away from their jobs, and STRs take away housing from them while unfairly competing with their hotel jobs. Unfortunately, we learned of the proposal that is before you a bit late, but we would have loved to work with the city to come up with the strongest possible regulations. We would have supported the city's current effective ban on STRs, similar to that of West Hollywood's. We also would have supported a home sharing ordinance in which the host is required to be on site, similar to Santa Monica's law. At the very least, you should consider the following 3 elements in order to ensure your policy is effective: a primary residency requirement, strong enforcement through platform accountability, and a cap on the number of permits issued. First, you should include a primary residence requirement, meaning that the host actually owns the home that they are renting out. Without this, companies can buy up multiple properties and rent them out as party houses, even if they're under separate companies or under separate owners. Second, the ordinance doesn't include any regulations that the STR platforms themselves must adhere to, such as requirements for sites like Airbnb to list only permitted short-term rental units or share data about how many nights are booked and tax information in order to make parts of the ordinance, like the 2+ night stays part of it, enforceable. Without this framework, the city is responsible to look at these sites by hand instead of holding companies like Airbnb, VRBO, and HomeAway directly accountable to the city's laws. Third, there is no proposed cap on how many of these short-term rental permits can be issued, meaning that the city could end up with unlimited party houses, which makes this ordinance allow for more party houses than prior to this ordinance being issued. And with all this in mind, it is the city's best interest to delay this. Although we respect the intent of the proposed ordinance, we do not believe it is written in the most effective way, and we would help in any way that we can. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Anstead. There are no further hands raised to speak on this item.
Thank you. Before closing the public hearing, do any council members have any further questions of staff? Nobody? Mayor Pro Tem Buckley-Weber?
I don't think it's a question, so I can wait. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, Councilmember Wolf.
Is there any possibility of a cap, or that opens us up to, that's an arduous regulation that wouldn't be realistic to enforce, to cap the amount of short-term rentals in the city?
Yes, it is arduous. Yes, it would open us up to that. No, we don't have the staff for it, but budget season is coming up, so I could request additional staffing to be able to do it. To do on-the-spot SNAP audits over individual properties. You could be a person that just doesn't like Airbnbs, and you could request us to do it time and time again. So my recommendation would be that if we're going to do the audits based on complaints, that we would take the total number that we know of, which is 47 units, and we would anticipate that at least quarterly you would be auditing every one, and we would multiply that by the cost of the audit, and we would ask for it. So that's how I would go about doing it. We would need more resources and probably more staff, or a contract to have more staff, but if that's what you guys want to put into the code, we'll find a way to implement it as best we can.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
To our speaker's question, can you clarify again about special events? If there is a house, for example, that is being rented for a weekend and they want to hold an event there, can they or can they not? And is there, what is the process? Because it is a little confusing as to the maximum occupancy in the process.
Yes, just to be clear, the special events section is in the prohibitions. So the short-term rental ordinance specifically prohibits special events. but we have to include a caveat saying that if they were to obtain a temporary use permit, then it might be able to, which is already described in our current municipal code, then they might be able to exceed those for, you know, a night if they obtain permission to do so. But that's determined on what zone they're in and what we would already be able to approve right now for a temporary use permit. Hopefully that clarifies it a little bit.
I'm still a little confused.
If the pleasure of the board is to prohibit temporary use permits across the board for short-term rentals, I'm sure that's something we could entertain.
Okay, I guess, so what you're saying is it's not prohibited.
It is prohibited without a temporary use permit. So, for instance, I have my house. I'm very happy to say that both of my children are graduating this year. My daughter graduates from college, my son graduates from high school. If I wanted to have an event where I invited my family and loved ones to come and say congratulations, and it exceeded anything that was normal use of my house, I would come into the city, I would say, hey, I want to have this great party for my family. As a property owner, I can get a temporary use permit as long as I meet all the provisions in the ordinance. It's a ministerial action. And so it is included in my bundle of rights as a property owner. I'm allowed to do that. Short-term rentals, if we prohibit and ban them outright, then even the owner wouldn't be able to get a temporary use permit at their property if they were staying there or if they chose to have one. And so it is something, if it is a provision where you wouldn't even be able to access it, then we would look for a way to do it. But I will defer to Candace. She seems to have her mic on.
Yes, thank you. If you look at section 9678.1 of the municipal code, it addresses the uses permitted subject to a temporary use permit, and it is fairly limited. So I'll read off a few of them. And temporary structures such as model homes, real estate offices, construction trailers, mobile homes used as residence during construction. There's a limited time on that. Seasonal sale lots like Christmas trees and pumpkin lots, nonprofit, commercial, special, and community special events, outdoor sales, motion picture filming not exceeding 7 days, temporary parking on undeveloped adjacent lots, recreation, cultural, civic uses. Now, the one I think that this would fall under is other temporary uses, which in the opinion of the director are compatible with the intent and purpose of this chapter. So it would be fair, I would think that the director would be very limited in when she would issue a temporary use permit. It's not a carte blanche, anyone could come in for a temporary use permit for any reason under the sun.
So if I wanted to, or if someone wanted to rent a house for the short term and throw a bachelorette party for 50 people, would they be able to come in and get a temporary use permit and rent a short-term rental?
The answer is no. We have provisions that require parking when you have a temporary use permit. You have to have sanitation facilities when you have a temporary use permit. And if you are renting a house the house is intended to have 14 people, it seems to me that it would be unreasonable for me as the director to approve double, triple that amount of people. So I would likely not approve that because you wouldn't be able to meet all the other ministerial provisions that are in the code.
And you would know that that is a short-term rental?
And I would know that as well. Now, if the owner were to come and say, hey, we want to have a big old bash here, and this is what we want to do, I might think about it, because who am I to stand in the way of a property owner from enjoying their property? But if it's a short-term rental group and they're like, we want to have our bachelorette party and we're renting this house, if they disclose that, I'm not going to treat them the same as if the person who owns the house wanted to use it in that way, because we know that it's a sensitivity in the community. And I would certainly not want to we have limits on how many temporary use permits you can have and what the frequency of a temporary use permit would be. You can't just have them every day. There's a period of time in between temporary use permits, and the temporary use permits are only good for a certain duration. So if we saw a proliferation of them, Robbie's Robbie's staff, Dawn, would tell me they just had one 3 days ago, but usually temporary use permits are for big events, and they're sporadic. They don't happen
And they're expressly prohibited in this ordinance.
in this ordinance.
Okay, so I hope that answers your question. Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Ms. Thomas, did you consider at all that, like LA County, that the only person who can get the business license would be for the primary residence? Like if it's your primary residence, you can get a short-term rental.
We did look at that. Again, 83% of our short-term rental units in the city rent out the entire unit. So if we included that particular provision, it would likely eliminate up to 83% of the short-term rental units in the city. In addition, it's extremely difficult to enforce. So we would have to ask for certain things to prove the primary residency. And really that provision is helpful if, in a certain jurisdiction such as Palm Springs, that is really in danger of losing their existing housing stock. But the market conditions here, we only have 0.6% of our units that are short-term rental units. So market conditions would not typically support
Thank you.
that. Yeah.
Okay, I have one or two last questions. In Calabasas, I know there was a rash of homes from celebrities using the homes for rave parties or things like that, and I think they were short-term rentals. Did we check to make sure whatever provisions they added in to avoid that were included in our short-term rental?
Calabasas doesn't allow short-term rentals.
Ah, okay. Thank you for that. And then, Ms. Thomas, you also mentioned that we could revisit this in 6 months, again, if we wanted to make modifications to it.
That's correct.
I would also add, if we have a huge issue, there's nothing preventing Mr. Hamburger from saying, this is like an acute problem, I'm going to bring it back sooner. Right. So that's just right now the general recommendation of 6 months.
Okay, thank you. All right, before closing the public hearing, do any council members have any further questions? Make sure got everybody. All right. There being no further questions, I will now close the public hearing. Before we move on, deliberations, got to ask again, does any council member have any further comments? All right. I will now call on each council member for deliberation. How about Council Member Sylvester? I'll have you start us out.
Thank you.
No problem.
Well, I've been thinking about this for quite a while, and I sort of went, when I met with you and then I went through, I looked at a couple of cities and what they're doing. I did not know that Calabasas had outlawed them completely, which I think is very interesting. But I'm happy that we are going to review this in 6 months because this is a new ordinance. And if it can help our residents and prevent the incidents that you've been subjected to, then I think then we'll know the ordinance is working. If it doesn't do that, then we do have the option to bring it back. And at that point, maybe consider outlawing them completely if it's an ongoing issue. So I think we're giving the residents who are the homeowners that are using short-term rentals to make a little extra money, we're giving them a chance to do it well and within the parameters that make the neighbors comfortable. And if they don't do that, then we can say that we will consider banning them altogether. So I would prefer to go in gradual steps than to just ban outright. I'm not concerned about, they mentioned how renters, low-income renters are being displaced. We put protections in there for renters that are currently in well, they're not in short-term rentals, they're in long-term rentals, I think. So I think they are protected. So I'm not so concerned about that. I think, as I said before, if we made it a 3-night minimum, there's nothing to stop somebody from paying the 3 nights and just turning up for 1 or 2. So again, I think the onus is on the owners to make sure that there isn't any activity going on that is a nuisance to anybody in the surrounding areas. And with the other amendments I requested earlier, I'm comfortable like being able to read the notices from the street and things like that. I am comfortable with that. So for me, at this point, I would like to give it a chance and say to our residents, we don't want to come down with a heavy hand. If you can abide by all these rules and make sure that your guests do not impact the neighbors, then we can proceed. So that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, this is a very long time coming, so I'm happy that this is finally up here on the dais with us all. Our neighbors have been asking us for something like this for a while. We brought it to our goal-setting session last year, and it's taken a long while. Staff has had to do a lot of research, and I want to thank them for really doing a broad reach of research to bring us something that's very, I think, right for our city, because I know it goes from everything from a total ban to Party Central. So I want to thank staff, and especially want to thank the homeowners who have been speaking up about this, because what most important is to feel safe and happy in your home, and to have that disturbed over and over again is just not a good quality of life. And I'm really hopeful that this will help with that. So I'm very much in favor of having an ordinance, very much in favor of protecting our residential neighborhoods and the vibe of our residential neighborhoods, protecting quality of life, and making sure that nuisance and abuse of these homes is reduced. I'm happy it's kind of win-win in terms of business, registering it as a business and getting TOT, and really, as Adam Haberstock said, putting it on par with some of our other businesses, and making some additional budgetary help for the city as well. I am concerned about reducing the housing stock. And I'll get back to that. But I also, we did hear from a few good Apple homeowners who were doing the right thing and relied on this. So I agree with Councilmember Sylvester that, we're giving them an option to continue that and allow that for the good actors. What I would like to ask our council to consider is, I understand the minimum days, and I do worry that if a big house is being rented for $1,000 a night, and we say, well, there's a 4-night minimum, they'll say, fine, well, $250 a night. So I would like to see more days and a longer rental period, but I don't know how we make that useful. So I'm willing to give it a try at 2, even though I think 2 is too short. I just don't know how to make it longer than that and give some punch to it. The one thing I would like to ask council's thoughts on is the maximum number of people. These are big houses, and we picked a number of 14. 14 people seems like a lot to me. We did get 1 or 2 letters saying that seemed like a lot, so I would be interested in hearing if council feels that that's too much, or if that's a good number. I have mixed feelings on it. And I also would like staff to maybe do some research on a cap, meaning, we don't have more than, let's just say, I don't know, I'm not saying this is the real number, but let's just say 60. We have 60 permits, we have 60 business licenses that we will give out across the city, and once we hit that, we do not give any more. I'm not saying that we would approve that or not approve that, but I think it's an interesting point that Allison and Lael bring up, and I think that it would be useful for future discussions about that. But what I don't want is, I don't want the the perfect to be the enemy of the good. So I don't agree with the commenters that are asking us to reject this tonight. I do think that this is a good first start. I do think that it is a long time in coming. And also I wanted to say to Councilmember Wolf's point, in the code of conduct, if we can maybe be clear that outdoor bonfires are prohibited, because people don't know the fire code. They don't even know that they're in a very high fire severity zone. So I would like to have a code of conduct that is required to be, with emergency numbers and things like that, that is visible to all people. Yes, Denise.
Would it be your recommendation to add that prohibition to the list of prohibitions in the ordinance, and then that way we could codify it, or do you simply want it to be identified in the code of conduct?
I mean, I would like to see it as a prohibition. I think that's very dangerous for people who don't know our area to be coming and throwing. I remember the story of someone quite literally juggling fire, and that's definitely not an Agoura Hills resident. So yeah, I would be in favor of really clarifying that. Don't need the cap right now to be codified and discussed, but I do think it's an interesting concept. So I'm ready to proceed. I'm ready to proceed as is. I do just would like to hear the council members' thoughts on the maximum number of people, and I'm very excited that this is moving forward. So thank you, or hope it to move forward.
May I make a suggestion, which you are more than welcome to reject, which is, I think once we develop this short-term rentals ordinance, I imagine the city will probably have a short-term rentals ordinance page on its website, and that's where they can say, okay, here are all the various provisions that often come up with short-term rentals. One of them is the violation of the fire code. Section blah, blah, blah of the fire code says you cannot have bonfires, rather than putting it in multiple sections and making it a little bit more.
No, I mean putting it in the house, because people who are showing up, who are showing up, you know, every time I've rented an Airbnb or something like that, you know, there's been some kind of folder or sign or something that says, here are the local numbers, you know, trash night is Thursday, you know, et cetera. And so I would say that, you know, to the code of conduct, to have a physical, you know, paper in the house or on the lease or something that the renter is seeing.
Got it. Thank you.
But I'm ready to proceed with this, and once again, I want to thank the residents for their, you know, for their contributions to the discussion, because it's affecting you greatly all across the city. Thank you.
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mayor. So the fact that we have to come up with an ordinance for short-term rentals shows just how desirable our community is, that people do want to come here as a vacation spot or as a place to get away. So I do think that it's unique. I also want to comment on the 0.06% of houses. So it's a very, very small number, but it has an outsized impact on residents in Agoura. So I think it's important that we do not remain silent and do get something on the books to regulate this. I do want to comment on our brothers and sisters from Unite Here, Local 11, and they made some good points. But regarding the cap, I don't see it feasible right now with the staff size that we have to be able to efficiently put a cap at this time. So I feel comfortable moving forward as it is right now, and to revisit possibly in 6 months or so. I do thank you, Councilmember Lopez, for bringing up the bonfire, and I'd love to hear what other council members have to say about that. And then also the recommendation of posting the numbers, I think, is critical, just to be prepared. Because I think that the vast majority of these homes are in the very high fire severity zone within the city. So I think it can have positive impacts and it can have negative impacts, and it's a balancing act. The positive impacts is the influx into the local economy, people coming to our stores, people coming to our restaurants, and the TOTs that we're going to be able to collect. That's a bonus. But how do we balance it with our residents who live here day in and day out? And then, you know, there's a revolving door of a party house. I would be interested in seeing what the council thinks about a 3-night minimum. I think that it's either a 3-night minimum or looking at 14 people or less. I don't think that we should do, I think it's one or the other, but I'd like to hear what the council has to say. So I am comfortable moving forward, but interested in a few of those outstanding items.
Thank you, Councilman. Mayor Pro Tem Buckley-Weber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just so I'm clear, Councilmember Lopez and Councilmember Wolf, are you saying that there should be a ban on fire pits, or are you just saying that there needs to be instructions within the House about how to use the fire pit, and if it gets out of control, here's a, you know, what do you call it, fire extinguisher?
No, a ban.
A ban
A
on
ban
all fire pits.
with outdoor fires.
Okay.
And clear signage that says that.
Okay. Was that your position too?
That is my position. I do not think that there should be outdoor fires, pits, and short-term rentals.
Okay,
So a
great.
ban.
So my other question was about the cap, and I may have missed something in translation, but was the cap that we were talking about a limit on the number of business licenses, or was it a cap on the number of nights?
I might have not articulated that well, but the cap was regarding the number of business license.
Okay, would that be a problem for staff to have a cap on the number of business license?
It's essentially what happens in Palm Springs. They basically have a moratorium, so you would go through this periodic moratorium. As a planning director, it wouldn't be my preference to have to go through that exercise on an ongoing basis, but if that's the pleasure of the council, we will work with that.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure I understood that, you know, and then I'm happy to give my thoughts on it. In terms of, and my last, you know, kind of question to make sure I'm clear, is that the way I understand the 14 is, wouldn't that have to be a 6-bedroom house? Am I reading that right? Because it's 2 people per bedroom plus 2 more people. So you'd have to have a 6-bedroom house to have 14 people, which, you know, lots of people do have 6 bedrooms, but a lot of people only have 4. And so then it would be maximum 10 people. So, you know, to me, 14 that seems like an okay number for me personally, in terms of that. In terms of a cap on the business license, I find that really an interesting idea, but I wouldn't want to overburden staff, and I don't really think it would be fair to have a moratorium so that other people, as they move into the community, wouldn't be able to get a business license. So you know, but we can revisit that when we revisit. I like the 6 months because then we'll know if people are paying the TOT. I never found the definition of a bedroom, but my understanding from a long time ago is a bedroom is something that has a closet. So that gives, you know, and I don't even know if that holds up. We'd need a realtor here, but that's what it used to be. One of the things that's really important to me, and I know I'm really sensitive to light, you all know I'm really sensitive to lighting, I'd really like to see a provision in there that if the lighting is not shielded and downward facing, that it would fall kind of within the quiet hours, like it would have to be turned off. You might have noticed around town where people have been stringing lights in their yards, and they're just light bulbs, and they're strung all across the yards. And so I think that in a short-term rental, those are going to be on, and they're going to be left on. I mean, you know, they're not paying the utility bill, so they might not turn the lights off, and that could be shining in a neighbor's eyes. So I'd really like to see that kind of lighting to be, you know, prohibited after 10 p.m. And so just from a safety standpoint, because what we discussed, you know, landscape lighting, that's all shielded. So you wouldn't be impacting, it wouldn't be dangerous for people to be walking around per se. It would just be, you know, that kind of is the only kind of lighting that I can imagine is something that's shooting up in the sky, which is also not good for our wildlife, but that's a whole nother issue. So I would like to see that added in 61004, maybe right after noise or wherever staff feels it's appropriate. As far as the rental term goes, and you know, this isn't personal experience, but I'm just saying back in the day when my kids were doing proms and homecoming parties, 2 nights was not a deterrent at all. In fact, that was even better than 1 night because they went on Friday night and got things ready for Saturday night. And so to me, it just seems like adding that 3rd night, I don't think a property owner is going to be like, oh, I'm just going to lower the price and let these people have my house for 3 nights for less. They might, they could do that. But I think that that just takes a little bit of the edge off, that you need to rent it for 3 nights. And if they're renting them for $250, $350 a night, you know, that just might be a little much for them for a 1-night party. I actually think that there could be a difference. And if we wanted to go to 4 or 5 nights, we can talk about that. But I think 2 nights is a little bit short, again, from, you know, back in the day. And I am being rejected right and left right now trying to get a VRBO and an Airbnb because I'm not willing to do a 7-night stay. So, you know, now that's out of the country, but still, there's a lot of 5-night stays, 7-night stays, so it wouldn't be that unusual to go from 2 to 3 nights. And I just think that 3 nights would be. But, you know, I hear what you're all saying, and I know it's not the best thing for local businesses, but I really think 3 nights will kind of, you know, really be a little more of a deterrent for people to have it as a party house. You know, I'm okay with a ban on a fire pit. You know, I think people really like using them, but I also know that people really don't know how to use them or to put the fire out. So I think that that's, you know, a good idea. Let's see, what else? And that's it. You know, I think, you know, personally, when I read it, and whoever was on the committee and the staff, I thought it was a pretty fantastic ordinance, especially since we have nothing. And we're going into this whole thing with this nice enforcement arm and business licenses and fees. And, you know, to me, it just seems like a great start. And we can always amend it if need be down the road. You know, unfortunately, it is our job to look at like the people who are causing the problems. And that's what we, you know, come up with a lot of these laws. But the majority of our community is not. And so I think it's a pretty good job. So thank you for doing that. And thank you to the committee, whoever that may be. You. So thank you. That's all I have to say.
Councilmember Sylvester.
Yeah, I would just like to respond to a couple of things. I like the exterior fire ban because most of these properties are in Old Agoura. I'd like to add to that the no burn days because they may not be aware and they may think they can have an indoor fire, but to make sure that somehow the no burn days information is shared with the rent, whoever's coming into the house that day. And that's on a, you know, that's on the no burn alert. So that would be the responsibility of the operator to let them know when it's a no burn day. So if we can include that. And you were talking about lights. If we can say that no additional lights can be put up, when their exterior lights can be added by the short-term renter. So they can't come in if they're having a bachelor party, they can't come in and string lights up, all over the garden suddenly that weren't there before. As well as having them go off at 10 p.m.
Oh, okay.
But I'm saying they can't come in and suddenly add things or bring in, you know,
decorative lights
decorative
for the party.
Lights. Can we do that?
I'm not really sure how I would be able to discern, or a code enforcement officer would be able to discern that those string lights were not put up by the property owner.
Yeah, but the neighbor would. So it would be, so the neighbor would know if suddenly there's sort of lights strung. Am I?
I mean, we can add it. I just, if the neighbor sees extra lights and they're like, wait, those lights weren't there yesterday, and then we send someone out and they're like, we didn't put these lights up. How do we enforce that? Candace, do you have any suggestions?
That is really, I mean, yes, you could add it, but it's very difficult to enforce because your ability to enforce this code is only as good as your evidence.
Okay.
So
taking a picture of the lights wouldn't be evidence?
it could be, right? It just depends on the vigilance of the neighbors. It's a combination of that and testimony. We've seen other short-term rental ordinances. Many provisions are difficult to enforce. I'll defer to staff on how they feel about that, but.
The other issue is that the abatement occurs when they take the lights down. So when the rental is over after
so then
3
it's-
nights, the lights go
Too
away.
short. Okay, I understand. So if we just have the 10 p.m., then that would cover that. And then finally, after listening to your wonderful argument, I would be comfortable moving to a 3-night minimum. Thank you.
Well, I hope my kids aren't listening to this.
Thank you for those comments. I think I'll go ahead and make my comments. I actually think you gave a good argument as well, Mayor Pro Tem, and I'm willing to go to the 3-day minimum as well. I think it's not a bad idea. I think that's about the max limitation that I would want to put, though, on the number of days. But I think that's reasonable, and it is used quite frequently. I've rented numerous VRBOs with my kids, and I think 3 days is normally a lot of times put on the limitation. So I like that provision, and I think the burn pit thing is a good idea just for public safety, and that's one of the main reasons why we're instituting this ordinance in the first place, is for public safety, and I think it's a good idea. I like it as well with the no fires basically in the rentals. And so I think that's a good addition as well. And overall, though, I think it was well written. I think it was well thought out. We looked at other cities that are doing it, tried to make sure that we were balancing the interest of owners and people that are renting these, or owners to be able to rent them out to make some income. And so I think I'm ready to move forward with these additional, the 3-day, to change it from 2 days to 3 days and add in the fire pit. Those are the 2 things that I would change. So any other comments based on those comments?
I'm also happy to agree to three-night rentals, and the lighting, the shielded lighting, is commented by Mayor Pro Tem.
And Councilmember Wolf?
I would agree to that also. The 3 days and the lighting, I guess.
And the lighting as well. Okay. So I think we got a consensus at least on that.
For
Hold on,
point
go
of
ahead.
clarification, are you wanting to just prohibit bonfires, which from staff is advised that's already not allowed by code? Or you're saying you don't even want a fire pit where a lot of residents have a fire pit, may have a fire pit in their backyard?
Is there a way to discern between gas and wood burning fire pit? I mean, I know that gets ridiculous, but is there a way to, the fuel driven?
You can, oh, I'm sorry, Denise, yes, you can. We could say, you could do propane, you could do natural gas, whatever the gas option is, you could do that. The easiest way is to say you can't use any of it, because if they see a fire in the backyard, then that's a violation. But if you want to allow them to use the amenities that are on the property, we could work with that. But no wood burning fire, we don't allow that just anyway.
How about an electric fire pit only?
I mean, when I was commenting, I meant no outdoor fire, period. You know, I would say with maybe the exception of a barbecue, because that's technically could be fire, but that's a protected unit. So that was what I was hoping for, just no outdoor fires
And we're just.
of any kind.
And it would just be no outdoor, no, we're not going back to the indoor like a fireplace. They can do that.
Yeah, I mean, I do take what Ms. Thomas's comments to heart in that this is only as good as it can be enforced. What I don't want to do is drill so far down into the nitty-gritty that property owners start saying, they're not going to come out and enforce this. So I would say to start out kind of on the higher, broader, and then if we see it's a problem, we'll revisit it in 6 months. But just that fire story of juggling juggling the fires, that shook me.
And what about the no burn days that the rest of the residents are under?
I mean, again, I think that could be a general code of conduct that you just have to follow the fire. I just think you have to say very specifically to renters, no outdoor fires. I just don't want to go too deep into details. I just want to make sure our hills don't catch fire.
I would be willing to support that and revisit in 6 months, but I think once we start, even I threw out, well, what about wood fire? I think that we should start with no outdoor fires.
I'm sorry, I'm struck. It's very hard to craft these on the fly, right? Because in my mind, I'm thinking, some people have outdoor patios and they have an outdoor fireplace, like a gas burning fire. So does that get included? I can see carving out specifically a barbecue. So I'm afraid there's going to be a number of exceptions or scenarios that we haven't thought of because this was not brought to our attention earlier. So, I mean, one option is to have the fire issue come back in 6 months. And whether that's even a broader thing beyond just short-term rentals, right? If you're concerned about outdoor fires, period, is that limited to short-term rentals, or is it anywhere in a very high fire hazard severity zone? So anyway, I'm going a bit beyond that, but for purposes of no fire outside,
I'm concerned about people who don't live in Agoura Hills coming here and having an outdoor fire and not realizing that.
What about a heat lamp?
That's not
a
fire.
fire. That's propane fire.
Yeah.
So I'm very careful, but I love
I think
my
heat lamps could be excluded if you wanted to state that.
And we may think of another one in 3 weeks, right? So I'm not trying to be a naysayer. That's a very legitimate concern. I just feel like staff in our office need a little more time to hash out what type of outside fire activities we ought to prohibit. That's just my observation, but it's the council's pleasure.
How about just stick twirling?
Yes, no twirling,
no wood
juggling
burning
fire.
for sure.
But what you're saying, Denise, is that is already in there because that twirling fire, juggling, blah, 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 is already prohibited by fire code.
That is, they shouldn't have been able to do it. We just don't have the authority to enforce the fire code. It's not one of the ones that's under my purview. The fire department does, but by adding provisions like that, now we can enforce it as part of the short-term rentals. So it was a way for us to address
Yeah, and I would like to see that.
the residents' comment. If it helps at all, if you say no out, just go with me on a trip. I camp, and all over the state of California, you can't burn wood. Burning fires at certain campgrounds, you can't burn, but you can burn propane because for whatever reason, Cal Fire believes that propane is acceptable where wood is not. If the answer is no outdoor fire, in my opinion, it would include every fire source. It would include the barbecue pit. It would include the heat lamps. It would include your lava rocks behind the glass. It would include the fire pits themselves. It includes all fire. And we would enforce it that way if it's no fire. So if that's what your pleasure is, then I think that makes it easy for Candace. She could just say no fire, no exceptions. But if you think that you may want exceptions, you probably would be better served to give us an opportunity to really give it some thought and to bring you back some suggestions on what it is. I'm okay with it either way. We'll enforce it either way you adopt it. But I just think if you want to be more considerate about it, we would be willing to come back to you with some suggestions. Those are my thoughts.
Okay, can I ask a question? We're not finalizing tonight anyway, correct? Oh, we are finalizing tonight. So if we, because the problem with fire is the embers, with those fire pits. And what causes the embers is the wood, correct? So does any other type of, I mean, like if it's a gas pit, there are no embers. Am I correct?
Frankly,
there?
I don't know. Usually the
Sorry?
propane.
My propane tank, my propane fire pit doesn't have embers. It burns off the gas, just like the heat lamp does.
So if what we're concerned about is embers, so if we said no wood burning,
And that's
outside.
already in the code.
It's not in, I don't believe it's in the code for a fire pit, is it?
No wood burning.
It's not in our, it's in the fire code, it's not in
fire
our
code,
code.
yeah.
Right,
And
so-
also, just remember, we did just pass a climate action and adaptation plan that doesn't want to encourage natural and propane
they're
gas,
there.
but I'm just,
But they're there already.
Yeah.
I mean, so if somebody comes in and there's a gas-burning fire pit with glowing, rocks, they're going to think, well, the resident can do it, and what's going to prevent them from just turning that on? So I'm just saying, if it's no wood burning, which is the safety issue that we're concerned with, would that protect us? And we could maybe start there, and then if it becomes a problem, then we could go further.
Because don't we have the same issue with abatement? That by the time we go to them, the residents have left and they had a heat lamp on. So I don't know, maybe we start with a ban, just a ban of all fires, and then you could bring back, just so we can have something starting tonight or whenever, and then we can revisit. You can come up with some language maybe that we can all look at for propane or barbecues. I mean, I don't think we want to say people can't use their barbecues, but I don't know.
Going back to what Councilmember Sylvester said about the wood burning, I mean, is there a reason why that doesn't make sense? If we just did that, if we just added wood burning for outside?
I'll go with whichever way the council wants, but I kind of like the idea of staff coming back again, but not to put this on hold, to come up with something for tonight, and then we can have staff come back with other language and see what happens. Maybe we'll hear from some of the people who have VRBO, have short-term rentals, and we can, maybe they'll contact us and say, look, the only way I can rent my place is because my yard is so beautiful and it's got a fireplace that's completely contained, that's run on propane. So I don't know. I mean, I would like, personally, I'd like to see it pass tonight. It sounds like we all are supportive of a short-term ordinance. And then if that's a stickler for us, have staff come back with language. And I could either go with a ban on just wood burning for now or a complete ban until we can revisit it. Whatever everybody wants is fine with me.
Any comments?
Well, to the city attorney, is wood fire, is that something that we would be able to write tonight? Or, I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I am.
She also has to add in the lighting, I think.
You could, but I still think there's potential unintended consequences, which is why my recommendation would be to come back in 6 months so we can look at this adequately. But of course, I'm not trying to cross the council. I'm trying to straddle a fine line up here.
I would be fine to come back in 6 months, just because the prohibitions of the crazy things are already in the fire code, and we would just have to get the fire department out there. But I would like for long-term to have our staff to be able to address it. So I don't want to make Candace uncomfortable. No, I appreciate that there might be unintended consequences, and so I think our biggest concern about safety is already in fire code, and I'd be happy to just ask staff to look into it.
And I want to agree with Councilmember Lopez that in a perfect world, I think we want something in this ordinance that we don't have to rely on the fire code, that it would actually be a violation. And so I think that we want to figure out what that language would be, but that we want something to be a violation, not just a violation of the fire code, that it would actually be a violation of the short-term ordinance. I don't know what it is, but I think it's a good idea.
I would be happy to wait 6 months until staff has time to really evaluate what would work and what would be fair.
Okay. Denise?
I'd like to say this on the record so everyone hears. If a resident sees fire twirlers in the backyard, and I'm not being silly, if you see fire twirlers in the backyard, call the 24/7 hotline, report it as an incident, and you can get the operator to come and stop them from doing it. Until we sort this out and we get the proper language, please, 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 it is, if you see someone twirling fire or playing with fire in the backyard, or you see wood burning fires in the backyard, call the 24/7 hotline, and we'll get the operator over there, and we'll work diligently to try and resolve the issue in a way that it's enforceable, but use that tool, please.
I also want to ask about the lighting provision. Are you comfortable adding the lighting provision, and what do you have that you're looking at?
I would perhaps maybe ask staff, and maybe you could repeat that. I was so fixated on the fire issue at the time that I kind of missed the language on the lights. So if someone could repeat that, or if staff feels like I wanted to go through and point out the sections that we're going to revise and kind of read that back to you. So Robbie, I don't know if you want to jump in first.
Right.
I think Robbie knows.
If I'm understanding it correctly, it would be an addition to Section 61004 operating requirements to state that any lighting that is not shielded and downward facing must be turned off between the quiet hours period of 10 p.m. to 10 a.m.
Perfect. Yeah. Would it be helpful if I went through the other provisions based on what I've heard from council, what I think is council consensus? So if you look at Section 61004, and this is going to be on page 5, E, rental term would be revised to read, each rental term shall be no less than 3 consecutive nights. Based on the discussion of code of conduct, I actually recommend some changes to paragraph H, code of conduct. So it would I would recommend this language, but feel free to tweak it as you wish. Prior to each rental, the operator shall provide each guest with a code of conduct, and I would insert with rules and regulations, with applicable rules and regulations set forth in the Agoura Hills Municipal Code in a form approved by the city manager, and then strike which includes occupancy limits, trash cleanup policies, parking requirements, noise limits, and potential financial penalties, because that's almost limiting. What we want to do is put as many regulations into the code of conduct that Nate looks at. He's like, yeah, let's put in this Muni Code provision, and that it already says in paragraph H that the code of conduct shall be posted on the inside of the main entrance door to the short-term rental. So that covers your concern. So that's what I would recommend as a revision to paragraph H. How are the council members feeling about that?
That's good.
Okay, great. And then I think that covers it. Did I miss any other revision?
Yes. Where it says, if the property is gated, the operator posts a notice in a location visible to the public. Can we make it readable by the public?
Do we get into a language barrier with that?
That one, I mean, I don't know how big you can get it. I'm just trying to be practical here, right? If you're saying that the pathway is quite far away.
Yeah,
and then
because something's posted on a wall or a front door, you're not going to see it from the street. And you can't go onto a private property to read it.
Correct. But I could see how different people with different vision fields.
Right. So something that's at the edge of the property line then. I mean, I don't know how you would do that, but you know what I'm saying? So not that something that's way in the distance and they can say, well, yeah, it's visible, but
Are we
Do you
talking
think-
about J, visible address?
No, I.
I, okay, got it.
So what, the post the notice. Which gives the complaint hotline.
Yeah, got it.
I mean, it can be on a tree or something, but it's just somewhere at the front of the property am I making sense? I mean,
Do you think maybe you would be willing to talk about font size or size of the sign instead? Because I think, again, we're always thinking about enforceability.
Right.
Is someone arguing, well, it's readable to this person, but not readable to this person, and this part from this property it's readable, but not from
so
this.
then maybe within so many feet of the property line. So it can be like how you have like a sign, a flag or something. You would have something there that is close enough to the property line so that people can see it. That's my concern.
If I might interject, the reason why it said visible is because that gives us a little bit of flexibility so staff can determine where the most appropriate place to place it is. And so really the primary purpose is to alert the public that there's a 24/7 hotline.
Right.
There's a number to call. We don't want interactions, well, I won't say interactions, but conflicts between guests and
I agree
and
with you.
neighbors. So staff would make sure that it's in a common sense location where if somebody were to go and try to, knock on the door of the
Yeah, I
short-term
mean,
rental.
at 2:00 in the morning, you want to see, well, what do I do?
Right. So as of right now, I think there's enough ambiguity to where staff can work with them to put it in the best place possible. Whereas if
can
we
I-
specified 70 feet from
Yeah.
a certain location,
Okay.
then we might not be able to do that.
Well, can we say, with the staff, however you want to word that, but just so that people can actually know what's happening there. That was my.
I worry that if we go too deep and too detailed too fast,
Yeah.
like personally, I would want to see if it's a problem. Because what also, like back to the unintended consequences, if you have a big sign at the front of your yard, that's also going to irritate your neighbors. So I would just say, I would recommend leaving it and seeing if it's a problem.
Okay.
I think the intent is clear and that it, like you said, it gives staff the flexibility to enforce it. That would be my recommendation.
I like Robbie's suggestion of working with staff. Thank you.
And going back to the fire thing, I just want to comment that I am comfortable as well. And in 6 months, we're not in fire season yet either. So I think that the timing is good. And thank you, Candace, for working with us on that. Sorry to put you on the spot.
So if I have it right now, the way that it is basically the ordinance 23-467 with two amendments. One amendment that you called out was 61004, that we would change the number of nights from 2 to 3. And also paragraph H, we would amend the code of conduct. Those two changes.
And also a new paragraph N, as in Nancy, to that same section, with language as read by Mr. Nesevic. So it'd be those three changes.
And then I don't know if you need to put this in a motion, but 61008, the correction on appeals, and 61002I, the amendment as proposed, that were on the slides.
Do you want to pull up that slide, Robbie? So I think as Councilmember Buckley-Weber said, I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem Buckley-Weber said, it was the change to 61008 on appeals, and the other one was
61002I.
Yes. Erica, can you pull up those slides, please, if you're still here?
Hey, my watch hasn't gone off.
Those are additional changes?
It's not my bedtime yet. Oh, I think it's dead.
Okay.
They should be the slides right before the recommendation.
Okay.
We're replacing the 9s with 6s. There we go.
Oh, yeah, there it is.
And was there one more section? Okay.
There, yeah.
Oh,
Go back one
Can we go to
slide.
the appeal section, please?
There it is.
Okay. Okay, so I think I'll take a stab at it. So I will now call for a motion and a second to approve the staff recommendation to waive full reading and introduce ordinance number 23-467 with the following changes. Amending 6, or I believe it was it 91002? Or to 61002 I?
Uh-huh.
Is that the amendment?
That's correct.
And amending 91008?
61008.
Oh, 61008 on the appeals. And then in addition to that, amending 61004, the rental days from 2 days to 3 days. And on paragraph H, amending the code of conduct. And also amending paragraph, or N, or add, is that adding paragraph N? Adding a paragraph N. And that's the language for the lights on that one, or?
Yes, read by Mr. Nesevic.
Read by
And I
Mr.
read the language for paragraph H.
So with that, I will call for a
So
motion and a
moved.
second.
Oh, so moved.
I'll second.
Second. All right. I now defer to the city clerk for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Lopez.
Aye.
Councilmember Sylvester.
Aye.
Councilmember Wolf.
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Buckley Weber.
Aye.
Mayor Anstead.
Aye.
Mayor Anstead, you have approval 5-0.
Thank you. Our next item is a discussion to receive and file an update on the preliminary design for the development of pre-approved building plans for accessory dwelling units. I will now defer to the Community Development Director, Denise Thomas, for the staff presentation.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, City Council. I'm very happy to share this information with you. I am going to give you a brief. We've been working very hard these last couple years on affordable or accessory dwelling unit prototypes, and I wanted to share our progress with you and to kind of brief you and the public on the benefit of having these. In many instances, tax dollars are paid to the state, and many of us don't receive a benefit from those. But in this particular instance, next slide, please. I'm going to discuss with you how that has been able to occur. We're going to go through the background of the grant and the background of these ADU prototypes and who designed them. And then I'm going to share with you some of the prototype designs that we are currently working on. So SB2, next slide, please. Senate Bill 2 allowed for grant opportunities where you would be able to, local jurisdictions could accelerate their housing production, they could establish a streamlined permit, and facilitate housing affordability. As part of our adopted and certified housing element, we have a program that says we are supposed to reduce the impediments to housing and governmental constraints. And we also have this program that says we would create prototypical ADUs that are available to the public. They come in and they would be able to get an over-the-counter approval after identifying where they're going to go and go straight to building permit without having to expend their own money to design, to hire architects and engineers to design these small units. The accessory dwelling units are a key part of our housing element. We are allowed to use 10 dwelling units a year, 10 affordable or accessory dwelling units a year. I'm going to call them ADUs from this point on. We're allowed to use 10 ADUs a year throughout the course of this RENA housing cycle. And so facilitating the development and delivery of ADUs is a goal that is in our general plan. The city has committed to developing pre-approved plans to streamline approvals. And as I said before, that's part of our programs that's in our housing element. We did a request for proposals and contracted with RRM Design Group to work with us to produce and develop plans that we could get plan checked and approved so that residents who want to use them will be able to come in, choose the model that fits their home or their needs, and then go straight to building permit. Next slide. The RRM, to begin, took a windshield survey, is what they called it, and they drove around the city and they looked at the housing styles that exist in the city of Agoura Hills. And what we're delivering to you are 3 architectural styles that match the majority of the housing types that we have in the city. I was surprised to find that we have quite a few Tudor-style homes in the city, but we do. We have those too. And so what we chose were the ones that are most prevalent in the most neighborhoods so that they would be of the most use to the most residents. And the first one that I want to show to you is the Spanish style. So this may look like a familiar style to you. We have neighborhoods in the community that are stucco finished, that are very warm tones like beige and browns, that have the clay tile roof that mimics the Spanish style architecture. Next slide, please. We also have quite a bit of California ranch architecture in the city. And these are typified by the porches and the walkways leading up to the front door that is generally centered on the facade of the front entry. Next slide, please. We also have cottage architecture, and this particular elevation shows the grid windows, the low-hipped roof, and it mimics a lot of the architectural features that you might see in other homes that are in the city. So next slide, please. So how are these used? What does that look like or mean to a resident? We were able to negotiate 3 different architectural styles with 3 different housing sizes. So you could have a studio in any one of those 3 architectural styles. You could have a 1-bedroom or a 2-bedroom. Some of them are square and others are rectilinear. The rectilinear ones are really good for hillside lots or lots that don't have very deep backgrounds. You can tuck them either onto a side of the yard or you can tuck them in the back, and you still have maximum usability of your yard as much as you have left on the smaller lots. On some of our residents that happen to own large lots, this isn't a constraint, but this opens up the door for people whose lots maybe aren't as large as some of the lots we have in our semi-rural areas throughout the city. What it looks like to you as a resident. You can walk into our counter once these are finalized and have gone through plan check and they're adopted. You can say, I would like a 2-bedroom cottage style ADU. You will submit a site plan and some other information, show us where you would like to place it, and then you would be able to go straight to building permit. You don't have to contract an architect or an engineer or a geotech person to kind of design it for you. It's already being done. The benefit is we can deliver these units sooner without many iterations of revisions. A lot of our residents have complained about the number of iterations that they have to go through at our building department in order to get an approved plan. When you submit, if you're not used to developing property and you come in and you're like, well, it's a small house, so I can do that. So they attempt to do a lot of the work on their own. But surprisingly, houses that are small still require engineering. They still have to be safe and habitable, and that costs money if you don't have that expertise or that credentials. And so what we're doing is using grant dollars plus the generous match that the City Council approved to deliver these to the community. This is the last of the items that we told Housing and Community Development that we would do as part of our SB2 grant. And as soon as these are approved, we'll be able to close out that grant and receive the last of the funding that is available. So with that, what my ask of you is this evening is I'd like for you to kind of give me your thoughts on the architecture. There's still an opportunity to make minor changes to the facades. If there's one of the facades that you feel just really doesn't represent the community, please share that information with me, and then I'll take your feedback and share that with the architectural firm before they begin to do the schematic drawings. And with that, I'm willing to listen to whatever you want to share.
Thank you. Before we move on to public comment, does any council member have questions on the staff presentation? Sure, council members.
Okay, I'm just looking at the third sample, which just happens to be I don't know which one. Is it the cottage style? Are those bricks that you've got around the front?
This model does have brick veneer, yes.
Okay. So if you went for this plan but you didn't want to, are you tied into those bricks? That's.
These plans do not allow the flexibility of adjusting the materials. Okay. We're approving them the way they are, and you can use these for either the fee for using them, if there is one, or if they're free, you can use them. If this is not to your liking, you would be able to hire your own architect and create your own plans. We wouldn't be able to give these plans to someone and say, hey, go and modify this if you wish. They would have to, it's kind of, it's like a burger menu.
Right, because to me anyway, the brick exteriors now are not as popular as they used to be. A lot of people now have stone instead, so they wouldn't be able to do that. I mean, would we be able to just allow some, no flexibility then?
However it's designed, the load of the building for the foundation, everything is going to be set and approved. So if the pleasure of the council is to not have brick, but to rather have stone, that's something I can take back to them and have them make that change.
All right. Thank you. I think this is a wonderful idea, and I think it's going to make it so much easier for our residents. But I just want to know if we had any flexibility.
Unfortunately, no. I mean,
okay.
No.
So that would be something we would have to decide. Thank you.
Any other comments?
Have we run these by our architectural review panel? I know we have a panel citywide and also specific in Old Agoura, just for their comments about the different facades?
The architectural review panel, ARB, the architectural review board will have an opportunity to review them. I wanted to kind of get your thoughts before we got to the point. I wouldn't want them to review plans and that you would want to change. So I wanted to get your feedback. Once we get your feedback and incorporate what we can, then we'll take it through the architectural review board at for the city. And then once we're ready to roll them out, we will make everybody aware of them. But we have limited. It's challenging to get 3 facades that matches every home in the city. And so the ability to make ad hoc changes is kind of hard because we have the grant money and then we have what was allocated. But right now I have the ability to make some gingerbread changes. So whatever you guys want me to consider, I'll ask RRM if it's possible within the contract that we have.
Okay, to Council Member Sylvester's point, the majority of houses in our city are now 50, 60 years old. And so, I've never had the ability to upgrade the facade of my house that was built in the 60s. So I'm just concerned that we're replicating kind of an outdated model. And so that I would actually almost like the reverse. Like I'd like to hear what the experts have to say on the facades and then have us weigh in, just because they would know more about that than I would. I have my personal preferences, but certainly not, as in tune to those styles as they would be.
Okay, yeah, we could do that. Essentially, what we were looking for, because when we adopted the ADU ordinance, our ADU ordinance specifically states that the ADUs have to match the architecture of the house. And so what RRM did was look at the architecture of all the houses and try and come up with compliant ADU facades. But we could certainly take this to the ARB and then give you an informational item moving forward. I have a little bit of time in our timeline. The grant expires, so we have to get all of our money before before the grant expires. So we do have time that we could probably take it to an ARB meeting and then turn it around real quick, because we are now, once the facades are locked, then we move on to the schematic drawings, which involves all of the systems inside the house. So in order to make all of the deadlines in time and still get our grant, get reimbursed for our grant, we have a limited amount of time, but I'll try my best to put it back on an agenda.
If the rest of the council agrees with that, because...
Well, I just, the ARB is really important too, but most of these are probably going to be in Old Agoura, and I would really recommend that we reach out to Danny Farkash, who appears quite often in front of the Planning Commission, has great taste and a great eye for architecture. I know that there's a lot of limitations, but Danny's very reasonable, and I think that it would be a good idea just to have him weigh in, and I'm sure he could do that within the next day or two. And if he hears the presentation that you have, I think he'll understand it.
We will make sure to reach out.
It's a good idea, Councilmember.
I think these look wonderful, and it's like a miniature Agoura Hills, and I really like this concept. If we get 20 built in 1 year, will we only get 10 towards our arena numbers, or is there any way to get 20?
That's a very good question. We're allowed to count 8 ADUs per year, 10 ADUs per year for 8 years. So if we get 20 in 1 year, I don't know I can't imagine why the net over the course of the RENA period wouldn't be permissible, but I can check into that and I'll make sure to let you know.
Okay, because that could be a creative solution to, help with our RENA numbers. My other question, and I think you answered it, but I'm not understanding it, is the color locked in of what color they would have to be?
The way that they would come this way, and if you wanted to paint them another color once they were delivered to you. So essentially what we're doing is we are designing 9 houses. We are designing 9 houses, 9 sets of plans, getting them all approved, and they look the way that they look. You can customize them once they're on your property. There's no prohibition to that, but we can't allow for switch out and change outs. Can you give me a blue one or a red one or whatever at the counter? So the goal is you get your house. Now, if you want to put this on your house and beige doesn't suit you and you're like, you know what, I like it to be a different color, you would be able to paint it a different color. We just wouldn't, the plans wouldn't come that way.
That makes perfect sense. I think this was a wonderful idea, and thank you for the presentation.
All right, any other questions? Okay. Written public comments were requested to be emailed in advance of tonight's meeting. If you wish to speak, please click the raise hand button on the Zoom toolbar now. Public testimony is limited to 3 minutes per speaker, and a speaker's time may not be transferred to another speaker. We respectfully request that if you have something to distribute to the council, you hand it to our city clerk and do not approach the dais. I will now defer to the city clerk.
Thank you, Mayor Anstead. There's no written public comments and no speaker cards have been submitted. We'll now defer to staff for any remote participants. Amber?
Thank you, Mayor Anstead. There are no further hands raised to speak on this item.
Thank you. Staff has requested the city council receive and file this report. Does any council member have any further questions or feedback for staff before I call for a vote to receive and file the report? Yep.
So can I clarify? We are requesting that this be reviewed before we make. I mean, what are we voting on right now?
I think we're giving input to
Just to give input.
Input.
Yes.
So
it doesn't require approval.
Okay, great.
The approval
And we've
would be
given you the
ministerial.
input to get feedback.
Yes, and what I heard was you would like very much for me to reach out to Old Agoura,
which we will do. If there's time, I'll reach out to the ARB just to be on the safe side. And yeah, I don't think that there was anything else you directed me to do. Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Let me start with the cottage style. Sorry, the cottage style I like, and this is just all personal opinion, but you're asking me my personal opinion. The California ranch style, I don't like. I think that that whole wall, I would like to see, and we even describe it this way, as an exterior wainscot on the California, it's on one side, but on the side with the 1, 2, 4 windows, that looks really plain to me. I think we can articulate and do something better than that. That's my opinion on that one. That's California ranch style. And then with the Spanish style, I like it. I don't like the double arch. I'd rather see one arch or, yeah, just double arch for little houses. Just not my taste, but you guys can all weigh in on it.
Yep.
And that's it.
Okay.
And then I just want to confirm, because there's going to be no asphalt roofing, right? It's all up to fire code, because one of them referred to shingle, asphalt shingle.
I did check with the building officials. So because we're in the very high fire hazard severity zone and we've adopted the standards for building materials, he wouldn't be able to have the old school, if you will, asphalt shingles, but asphalt shingles are actually allowed, and we do have them in the city. People do have asphalt shingles in the city. Okay. And being in the very high fire severity zone, we're allowed to use materials from Schedule A, I think, and Schedule A does include asphalt.
Okay. I'm not crazy about the look of the asphalt, but whatever. If it's allowed, it's allowed.
Okay. Councilmember Wolf? Input?
What am I being asked to do right now?
Your input into any of the styles?
The input in my styles. I mean, I don't have an architecture background. I agree with Mayor Pro Tem Buckley Weber on the ranch style. It would be nice to see on that one with the 4 windows, maybe, and I like the word you used, articulate that a little bit more. I would want to live in one of these. So I don't have, that's my only comment.
Awesome. Councilmember Lopez?
I agree with the comments that have been made.
I'm sorry? The city attorney was talking to me. I'm sorry.
I said I agree with the comments that were made.
Okay, thank you. I do have a comment, actually. I want to comment on Councilmember Sylvester's comment concerning the brick. I think also the stone is what most of the homes, they're like ripping out the brick and putting in stone, and most of the homes that I see that are upgrading their homes. So it seems to make sense that we would be looking at stone instead of brick. Just, I mean, again, that's my opinion and one opinion. So I think that would be one thing I would change. I also didn't really like the ranch style layout that well either. I didn't think it didn't seem to have any pizzazz. It just kind of seemed plain Jane a little bit to me, and so I thought it might need some changes to update it a little bit. So I wasn't sold on that one either, just from my feedback. I think those were the 2 comments that I had for me. So thank you. So any other comments before I move forward? Okay. So I think what I'm now going to do is staff has requested the City Council receive and file the report. I want to make sure first, before I call for a motion, is there any other questions or feedback before I call for vote? All right, so I am going to go ahead and call for a motion and second to receive and file this report, the report that we've been discussing. Do I have a motion and a second?
Councilmember Sylvester so moves.
Thank you. A second?
I'll second. This is Deborah Klein Lopez.
Thank you. I'll now call for the city clerk for a roll call.
Councilmember Lopez?
Aye.
Councilmember Sylvester?
Aye.
Councilmember Wolf?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Buckley Weber?
Aye.
Mayor Anstead?
Aye.
Mayor Anstead, you have approval, 5-0.
Thank you. Are there any comments from staff? All right. Mayor?
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor Anstead. All right, so I'm not sure many people know, but January is National Blood Donor Month, and so I'm happy to report that tomorrow the city will be hosting a blood drive with our partners over at the American Red Cross. Again, it's tomorrow, January 26th, from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. right here in our community room, which, for those of you that don't know, it's located right between the council chambers and our library. There is a link on our website where you can go and get information as well as sign up for an appointment. But of course, walk-ins are welcome. So we hope to see you out there, and that's all. Thank you.
Denise?
I would like to inform everybody that we had our first planning commission with the appointees that you guys have graced the Planning and Community Development Department with. Everyone's all sworn in. They look very eager to begin their work. I think you make great choices, and I can't wait to work with them.
Thank you. All right. Are there any comments from the City Council?
I just want to say that, you know, back in the day, there was something called Must See TV, and now it's Must See Podcast. And if you have not watched the Agoura Hills podcast, you really have to do it. I mean, leading up to this month's edition, we have had amazing guests come on, and not only is there really important meaty content in the podcast itself, but you're always going to get this amazing introduction from Ramiro Adeva, and I worry that he's not going to be able to outdo himself after this month's with special guest, none other than our city manager, Nate Hamburger. So I beg the public to, if you've never watched it, you got to watch it this month. Again, not only has Nate gone in and shown what we do, how we operate, why it's so important, and really how resident-centric we are in a really caring and compassionate way. But there's a good slew of humor in there that you know, that he brings and that Ramiro brings. And I just want to encourage everyone to watch this edition and then go back and watch the prior ones as well. So thank you for that podcast this month, because you guys keep outdoing yourselves. Thank you.
And thank you to our staff who did Amber and Celeste, who did just a phenomenal job acting in the podcast.
Lots of cameos. I'm not sure they were acting.
Yeah, I know.
But my favorite moment might have been just Christy, you know, slamming the you know.
How much can you
buttons.
donate to the general fund?
Exactly. No, love the cameos from the staff, and it was just fantastic.
Any other comments from City Council? No? All right. The next regular City Council meeting is scheduled for 6 o'clock on Wednesday, February 8th, 2023, in the council chambers of the Civic Center. It is anticipated that members of the public will have the opportunity to participate in person in the council chambers or by remote video conferencing. At this time, we will adjourn tonight's meeting. Will the maker of the motion and the second to adjourn please state your names?
Councilmember Buckley Weber moves to adjourn tonight's meeting.
Councilmember Wolf will second.
I'll now defer to the city clerk for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Lopez?
Aye.
Councilmember Sylvester?
Aye.
Councilmember Wolf?
Aye.
Mayor Pro Tem Buckley Weber?
Aye.
Mayor Anstead?
Aye.
Mayor Anstead, you have approval, 5-0.
All right, this meeting is now adjourned. Excellent.